Thank you for making me panelist. I've started recording, just so you guys know. Thank you.
Good evening.
Saw you at the Cal event last night on the giving the greetings from the board. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was fun to do. It was fun to see everybody all together doing, I mean, not literally all together. It was as close as we were going to get to all together, but it was nice to see all the greetings together.
Yep.
All right. I think. Oh, Tyler's here. Okay. And then I think we just need Susie.
Do we expect her at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday?
Oh, good point. Jim, do you know, I know you were talking to her a little bit ago. Do you know if Susie's going to be able to join us?
Just had a one-on-one meeting with her, and she said she'd see me in a few minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, I may go through some of the preliminary things as it is 7 o'clock, and Joe, I think it's a fair point that she does have to balance with work this evening, so we may. Okay. All right, good evening. As a preliminary matter, this is Jill Hay, Chair of the Lexington Select Board. Permit me to confirm that all Select Board members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Select Board Vice Chair Doug Lucente.
Yes.
Thank you. Select Board Member Joe Pato.
Yes.
Select Board Member Susie Berry. We can see you, Susie. Susie, can you hear us and/or can you unmute?
Now I can.
Okay. Welcome. Select Board Member Mark Sandine.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And participants from staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Town Manager Jim Malloy.
Yes.
Assistant Town or Deputy Town Manager Kelly Axtell. Sorry about
Yes.
that. We are also joined this evening by both our Executive Clerk Kim Katzenbach and our recording secretary as well, Ms. Patnaud. And we are, well, let me jump right in. The time is now 7:01 p.m. on February 1st, 2022, and I call this open meeting of the Lexington Select Board to order. For this meeting, the Select Board is convening by video conference via the application Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that the meeting is being recorded. Further, the meeting is being broadcast live and recorded for later on demand viewing by Lex Media. The supporting materials for this evening have been provided to the members of the board and are available on the town website. A few reminders before we begin. Please remember to keep your phone or computer on mute when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any responses, please wait until I yield the floor. And finally, any votes taken will be done by roll call. We have two items for our agenda this evening, and the first is an update, an opportunity for feedback on the Battle Green Streetscape project. And for that presentation, we are joined this evening by our town engineer, Mr. John Livesey, as well as consultants from the Beta Group. I believe we have with us both Tyler DeReuter and Kian Ho. Is that right, John? Is that who you have with you this evening? Okay.
That is correct.
Terrific. I am going to turn this over to you then. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Livesey. I'm the Lexington town engineer. And as Jill mentioned, with me tonight is both Tyler DeReuter and Ken Ho, both from the Beta Group and both engineers with the Beta Group that have been working on the Battle Green Streetscape design. We've recently presented the Battle Green Streetscape plan to both the Select Board in December as well as the Tourism Committee in January. And this is the next presentation. Our goals for tonight are to provide an update to the public as well as the board. We're also looking for feedback on what's presented tonight, particularly at the intersection of the Harrington Road, Bedford Street, and Hancock Street intersection, where the most substantial changes have been made. The presentation will include, the agenda will include brief project history, the project limits and goals, the accident history. We'll also discuss plans which have been developed and refined from previous input in public meetings that we've had several years prior. And then we'll take a deep dive into the intersection of Bedford Street at Harrington and Hancock. Just to touch on the history, the 2015 preliminary evaluation considered multiple alternatives and concepts for Battle Green in the three area intersections around the Battle Green. The evaluation for the Harrington Bedford Hancock intersection particularly outlined 10 preliminary design options, which we'll discuss briefly later. There were also traffic trials that were performed in 2016 to determine the impacts of making Harrington Road one-way westbound. That would be from Bedford Street toward Mass Ave. That trial found reduced conflict points for Bedford Street at Hancock Street and reflected a reduced crash frequency, although I will note it was for 3 months, which is a fairly short-term period to determine crash frequency. However, the trial did find changes in the travel patterns that negatively impacted area roadways, such as Revere Street and Merriam Street, and ultimately it was determined that it was not desirable. The study noted increased congestion at the intersection of Mass Ave and Merriam Street as well. Just to give people a little bit of a flavor for what traffic increases were seen. On Revere Street, we saw about an 8% increase in daily traffic, and the afternoon peak hour was approximately a 28% increase. For Bedford Street, at the left turn onto Hancock Street, the AM peak went up by 76%, and the PM went up by 53%. Merriam Street traffic, daily traffic, went up by 22%. And specifically, and the biggest concern we found was Mass Ave, where you take a left turn onto Merriam Street. The AM peak hour, it went up 70%, and the PM peak hour, the traffic went up 93%. And those of you that are familiar with that intersection, it can already be a little bit difficult, a lot of maneuvers happening there. So that was a pretty significant increase. Under the initial evaluations, a roundabout was looked at. However, the footprint did not seem to fit the intersection. But a lot has happened since then. There's been advances in design guidelines based on experience nationwide as well as in Massachusetts. And most notably, in the year 2020, Mass DOT, along with a consultant firm, Kittleson and Associates, who's known as an expert in roundabout design, developed and published their guidelines for the planning and design of roundabouts. That guidebook provides design and application guidelines with respect to Massachusetts projects. And it's adapted and expanded on information that was also outlined in other national guidelines. The current design that you'll be seeing later in the presentation adopts the latest Mass DOT design guidelines as mentioned here, and Kittleson Associates was hired as a subcontractor to Beta Group to help us with the design. So not only did they write the book for Massachusetts on roundabout designs, they also worked on this design for us. Next slide, please. So the project limits on the northerly and westerly side are from just beyond the intersections of Harrington, Bedford, and Hancock Street. And let's see, the easterly side is abuts the Center Streetscape project at Merriam Street. And it's essentially flanked by the 3 intersections. So just beyond the intersection with Mass Ave and Bedford Street near Merriam Street. And as mentioned a few times, the Hancock-Bedford Street intersection on the northeast corner. And then kind of the west corner is where Mass Ave meets Harrington. Those are the kind of the 3 intersections that bookend this project. Next slide, please. You can see the highlight there, gives you a general sense of the project limits as well. The project goals include improving pedestrian and bicycle safety, improving vehicular safety, and improving connectivity and accessibility throughout. I will note that the Harrington-Bedford-Hancock intersection has very high accident counts, our highest accident intersection in town, actually, and improvements there are paramount to this project. Additionally, you'll see that there are crosswalks that are particularly long in this particular area in the project limits, and design accounts for those and shortens those crosswalks to result in a much shorter crossing time for pedestrians. The connectivity includes connectivity to the old burying ground as well as the Belfry, and there's improvements throughout that make that connectivity much easier for people trying to navigate through here, particularly people that aren't familiar with the area. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Tyler, who's going to get into the accident data and the design of the project.
Hi, thanks, John. Again, this is Tyler DeRuiter, traffic engineer with Beta Group. The next couple slides will go through some data that we have, crash summary, and some further summary on the design sketches here. So this slide here shows some historical traffic volume that we have for the area. And the key thing to notice is the way that the daily volumes, which are shown as the big numbers, travel through the downtown. So it's clear that Bedford Street is one of the primary corridors that feeds into the downtown itself. And then we also have Mass Ave coming in as kind of a secondary road. And if you kind of look at the numbers and how they bounce around, you can get the picture of the volume from Bedford Street going up Hancock Street and kind of breaking off in a spur. And then also coming from Mass Ave, breaking off on Harrington Road and continuing up Hancock Street. So that is the general pattern. The counts here show similar patterns. Where are you going? Okay. Yeah, so I guess on this one back here, right? So we did count speeds at the one with the blue arrow, which is north of Hancock Street or west of Hancock Street, I'll say. And those were in the ballpark of 30 to 35 miles an hour. So pretty typical for a key corridor, I would say, at least. So you can go to the next slide. This one further shows the patterns, and what we're concerned about here is you can see Bedford Street has pretty high through movements, so north and south. And then also there are pretty high right turns going northbound on Bedford to Hancock, and then the reverse, left turns from Hancock to Bedford. Now those occur within like a little spur kind of bypass intersection, and they do not go to the stop sign and cross Harrington Road. That said, the through movements are also higher than the other turns. So why is that? If they're coming from Bedford Street and they want to turn left onto Hancock Street, there's other ways to do that. So they don't necessarily have to do that. And then likewise, coming from Harrington Road, making a left turn or a right turn, because of the way that Mass Ave aligns with things like Worthen Road, those movements aren't as heavy. So the ones we're concerned about are through movements along Bedford Street, through movements from Harrington Road to Hancock Street, and then the lefts and the rights between Bedford and Hancock. The ones that are of most concern are the through movements from Harrington Road to Hancock Street, the ones that are at the stop signs. And we'll talk about that later and why that's important with crash information. Jumping into crash information. So the number one thing we want to look at in the latest studies we do are the crash history and the Highway Safety Improvement Program. So the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, is a federal program that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is a part of. And they look at crash data for all of the intersections and kind of clusters within the Commonwealth. And they rank those based on the amount of crashes there are within that particular cluster. And then of the top 5% in each regional planning agency area, those are flagged as a cluster. And so you'll see those highlighted here in the different versions of the map. What's important to note is that the Harrington Road, Hancock Street intersection has been highlighted as a high crash cluster dating back all the way to where we stopped at 2015, and it's continued thereout. The most recent year of closed crash data that's been fully vetted by the state is 2019. So you can see that it's perennially been flagged as a cluster, and dating back to 2015, 2017, it was ranked as one of the top 200 intersections in the state. So we took a deeper dive at the crash information here. This is a summary that shows between the years of 2015 and 2019. Within those 5 years, there was 81 crashes at the Harrington Road, Hancock Street intersection. A little bit less of an issue for Harrington Road at Mass Ave with 2 in those 5 years. And then Mass Ave at Clark and Merriam had 12 in the same number of years. So clearly we're focusing here on the big red number 81. And so if we break that down, 80% of them were property damage and 20% had an injury. So what does that say? Okay, well, maybe there's a lot going on here. So the crashes that occur aren't wildly serious. That said, it's still highlighted as a high crash cluster. The most occurred crash type is angle at 83%. So those are related to the stop signs and the through movements that we talked about before, right? So if you're coming out at the stop sign, being able to judge when you can or can't go, because the volume on Bedford Street is as high as it is, maybe some people select gaps that are smaller than they should, or they get kind of anxious and make a turn without seeing what's going on. There are other types that we saw, but angle is by far the overwhelming one. There was 3 crashes we saw involving bicycles and none involving pedestrians. And then in the bottom left of the slide here, we broke down the what we call non-official. These are 11 crashes that the state has on record between 2020 and 2021. However, since those haven't been fully vetted, they don't really represent, or we don't know that they represent the full population of crashes. But for reference here, the trend continues, 9 angles versus 1 rear end and 1 bicycle crash. So it's clear that angle is the issue. Breaking it down further, we wanted to see if there was any other trends. So in the top right, we summarized this by crash hour. So you can sort of see on the chart as you go along to the right is time of day. And we found that the time period with the most amount of crashes is around the 5 o'clock p.m. hour. So maybe that's, as it starts to get darker, or there's a significantly higher volume of commuting traffic mixed in with the people going to the businesses in the downtown or circulating around to visit the Battle Green. In the bottom left, we have a trend year over year. So it did spike a bit in 2016, and then it's kind of dropped down but leveled out thereafter. And then we have 2020 and 2021, again, much lower, could be affected with COVID, but also noting that the full population isn't realized yet on those. On the right side is the crash month. So going to the right on the chart is January, February, March, April, etc. The highest month we found was September. And then other months throughout the summer were also high. So thinking about things that might be happening around the Battle Green in September, maybe school, those types of things. Next slide, please. So here's an overall concept of a sketch we've got of sort of planning of the Battle Green. We want to note that the stuff that's shown here isn't 100% finalized. Things like the trees aren't actually where trees are. It's just kind of a visual representation. So we're going to kind of step one by one. I think important to say here on this slide is what we want to do in between. So we would like to formalize parking a bit, add in some better crossings to really enhance the connectivity between things like the Belfry and the old burying ground. And then just circulation around the Battle Green itself. We know it's a very high trafficked historic area of our Commonwealth. Next slide. This is a zoom in of the Mass Ave at Bedford Street intersection. The library is on your bottom right. So the point here in the middle of the Battle Green is the statue that everybody's aware of. And in many observations, we've gone out there and seen folks will walk into this island that kind of separates traffic on Mass Ave, and they'll try to take pictures of the statue to kind of get a better vantage point. So this is formalizing that kind of pork chop looking island that's to the northwest of the library, right? So we've got a nice little walkway that connects the two crosswalks there. That provides a direct pedestrian connection between the statue itself and then the steps that go up to the Belfry. So we like that connection there. And then also providing a island that's on Bedford Street. One of the things we've noticed is that's a pretty heavily used crosswalk there going between the Battle Green and then the civic buildings on the north east corner of the screen here. This is a zoom in of the Mass Ave at Harrington Road. So the intention here is to take the existing what I'll call like 3 intersections around a triangle island and condense it down to one. And the reason here is when you have multiple intersections surrounding each other, you end up multiplying the number of points of conflict that aren't necessarily needed. So if we can condense all that down, we remove the amount of places where a crash could occur. And it's also providing a more direct and shorter crossing path for pedestrians to get from the Battle Green side over to the Yield burying ground side. Note that this isn't fully fleshed out. We've had conversations about what to do with the grassy area on the northwestern side of the intersection here. Where today there's a big island in the middle. Now we would be moving the grass over to one side. So still a little bit of discussion here to be done, but there is some benefits in terms of reducing conflict points for safety. This is the Hancock Street Harrington Road intersection. The black arrows sort of show the vehicle travel patterns as we see them now. So there's this little stub connection that goes from Hancock Street directly across to Harrington Road. That crosses Bedford Street to form a four-legged, two-way stop intersection. And then there's a bypass that comes from Hancock Street straight down and connects at an angle with Bedford Street. And that really accommodates the right turns and the left turns that we talked about earlier. Some issues with that is the angle that it comes in makes visibility a little tough when you're looking over your right shoulder to kind of judge gaps. And then likewise, coming out at the two-way stop with the four-legged approach there, it's difficult to see and judge the gaps in the Bedford Street traffic as they're moving along. So, we see a lot of the angles as somebody kind of pulls out of a stop sign and collides with somebody traveling straight on Bedford Street. So I think that was all I wanted to note there. Next slide. Okay, so John earlier mentioned the trials that were done several years ago. This slide outlines all 10 of them that we evaluated. I don't want to go through all of them specifically, but they include things like closing that right turn slip lane for Bedford Street onto Hancock Street, making roadways one way, as John mentioned. We looked at making the entire Battle Green circulate one way counterclockwise as if it was one giant roundabout type thing. And then we looked at various versions of signalizing configurations. And so the one that we'd like to go into a little bit more depth with today is the roundabout one, which is number 10. So here's a nice rendering of the roundabout. As John mentioned, we worked with our colleagues Kittles and Associates, who wrote the book on Massachusetts roundabouts. And they came up with this oval about concept. And so as John mentioned before, we took a look at a circle previously and said, okay, well, the footprint that we have, it doesn't really fit a circle terribly well because it's kind of a triangle, not a circle. And so this oval sort of shape tries to fit a circle within the triangle. And the new guidelines that have been put out working with the state and all across the country is roundabout doesn't really need to be a circle. The big marquee one in our Commonwealth is the Kelly Square Peanut. That's a pretty aggressive case. So we're trying to kind of take another look at this here. Big differences. Everybody in our Commonwealth here loves the word rotary. They're actually two different things. The rotaries are much larger in diameter, and they're typically for higher class roadways and interchanges. So your big arterial roadways, they accommodate a much larger design vehicle, a much larger truck, and because of that, the amount of pavement is wider, and so they have higher speeds in the range of 40 miles an hour. Roundabouts are much smaller. Their goal is to manage traffic at slower speeds in the range of 20 miles an hour, and sometimes even slower depending on how tight the radius is. And they typically manage lower class roadways, some smaller arterials, collectors, those types of things. So a good case is here where we have a two-way stop, and we want to introduce more gaps into the Bedford Street traffic so that we significantly reduce the amount of angle type crashes that we're seeing here today. Big benefit of roundabouts over a traditional intersection is that number of conflict points. So a typical four-legged intersection has 32 conflict points. Those are points within the intersection where two vehicles could crash into each other. This particular existing intersection, because it's three closely spaced intersections around a triangle, we calculated over around 50 conflict points. So we would be reducing that down to about 8. And those conflict points are where you might see a rear end. So if somebody yields to vehicles that are within the circle, and maybe somebody behind them thinks that they're going to go, but they don't go, and so they rear end them. Or it could be somebody pulls into the circle without yielding properly and they sideswipe somebody that's already going around the circle. Those two types of crashes are pretty low speed as you're yielding or you're going around this thing in the middle of the roadway. So we would typically expect less severe crashes and fewer of them as part of these designs. Key thing about this intersection and why it was so challenging is the deflection. So to slow the speeds, which is important for this to work, you need to deflect the vehicles so that they circle around the thing and they don't just go straight through it. That's why you see these kind of oddly shaped islands as a way to get the vehicles to maneuver around and slow their speed and as they approach it. That has a little bit of an issue with larger vehicle turns. So we need to make sure that we can get our vehicles around knowing that this is a heavily used corridor into and out of the downtown area. So the sketch here shows a mix of green and red. The red islands are things that would be mountable. So a truck might be able to overtrack on it if they had to go around. The center island or the deflector island for Harrington Road is entirely mountable because it's such a narrow roadway. And the angle that it comes in, it's very difficult for some vehicles to make that right turn if they were to go from Bedford Street southbound to turn right onto Harrington Road. We didn't see that volume as very high, but it might happen. So we need to make sure that we can accommodate it. And then the green ones are ones that could be raised or non-traversable. So things that might be landscaped or grass over or something like that. As you know, with the roundabout, it's a yield condition. So that for all the approaches, you would yield as you're coming in to the traffic that's already circulating around. And that helps generate some gaps in traffic as everybody's coming into a yield rather than the straight stream of traffic moving along Bedford Street. One of the questions I had last time when I was giving the sort of presentation was bicycles. So this accommodates bikes in two ways. One is roundabouts will have, and it's not really shown here as this is kind of a concept, but they'll have a little bit of a ramp that allows the bicycles to jump up from the roadway onto the pathway that goes around the outside of the roundabout. And then they'll be able to use the crosswalks or other ramps to get back down onto the roadway and continue whichever the direction that they intend to go. The other option, typically for more adventurous or comfortable bicyclists, is to use the actual circle as a roadway. And this works in most cases because we're slowing the speeds of the vehicles down. And so they're yielding to everybody as well. So we have two different ways that you could circulate here, and then you've got all the widened sidewalks traveling around for pedestrian access. Pedestrians are accommodated by the splitter islands so that they can cross one direction at a time. This is a little bit easier for some folks with visual or hearing impairments where they can kind of focus on one traffic stream and then move to the next. It's a little bit less stress on them. Some of these islands are a little bit tiny, so it's kind of a little bit to work on, but those are the key goals here. Next slide. That's it. Thanks for listening to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So with the board's indulgence, I am inclined to go directly to public comment at this point, because we have had an opportunity to hear this once before, and the purpose of this evening is really to get feedback from the community. I will also note for anyone who's listening that we did receive a letter of endorsement on this plan from the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and that is also included in the packet. Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. So I know there's been significant conversation about this on the Lexington list, among other places. Is there going to be a means by which people can submit written comments or questions
I believe that we are at the end, if there are, at least I have in my notes at the end to provide both our email address and Mr. Livesey's as well for follow-up and or additional written comment. So yes, I do not believe Mr. Livesey is correct. There is not a dedicated mailbox set up for this project. The best route of contact was your email and ours. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, can I just ask that that gets updated on the webpage on the town website? So what I'm getting at is people who weren't able to be here tonight, who might watch this later or might just have gotten a copy of this presentation would know where to get their information into.
Yes, my
I
understanding
believe-
is that on the project page, Mr. Livesey, is your address on the project page?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay,
I'll verify, but I believe it is.
Thank you. I thought we
Yes,
checked that this week, but we can double check that. Thank you, Ms.
I
Berry. That
just
was a good point.
double-checked. It is.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So with that, I am going to take public comment. Again, when I call on you, please introduce yourself with your name and your address. And we are going to limit comments to 2 minutes. But if you have a particular person to whom you'd like to address your question, please feel free to state that as well. And I believe, Ms. Gao, I saw you were the first person with your hand up earlier, so I will let you commence.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Betty Gao, 64 Ward Street, and I'm the chair of the Lexington Bicycle Advisory Committee. Yes, the Bicycle Advisory Committee strongly endorses the proposed roundabout at Bedford Street and Harrington Road, and we have submitted a letter that is part of this packet, as you said. The Bicycle Committee has studied the pros and cons of roundabouts versus other types of intersections, specifically in regard to bicycle safety. The proposed roundabout can be safer for cyclists and pedestrians than the current intersection. Generally, roundabouts are safer, as mentioned, than other intersections types for cyclists if the roundabout is single lane, as it is proposed. Cyclists either share the full lane with cars or are in a completely separated path, and if the roundabout is designed in such a way as to slow traffic, which has been what is being proposed. In a well-designed roundabout, interactions between the bikers and the cars can happen at low speeds, and then the drivers are easily aware that a bike is in the roundabout before the car enters the roundabout. The Bicycle Advisory Committee would like to provide further cycling-oriented feedback on the design detailed in the roundabout to include signage, which would alert cyclists of their options, and also alert drivers to expect cyclists to take the full lane through the roundabout, which was presented as an option. And the committee would like to provide feedback on the design of the sidewalk access for cyclists as an alternative to riding through the roundabout. We would also request that in this design, it is considered that you consider the safe access to and from the nearby Minuteman Bikeway as part of this intersection design. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gao. And next I see Joe Blatt.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
We can, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for calling me. My name's Joe Blatt. I live at 7 Linmore Terrace. And I actually played a leadership role in getting the roundabout that's by Diamond School connecting Hancock Street, North Hancock. So I'm familiar with roundabouts and how well they can work. But I do have 2 questions about this for your consultants. One is the data showed a very much heavier traffic both directions on Bedford Street than on the intersecting streets. So I wonder if it's going to be difficult for people on the intersecting streets to get into the rotary. And then in that connection, whether you considered a sort of sharing signal like they do in California, where they let a certain number of cars go and then halt the flow to give the other side a chance.
Thank you. Mr. Ho or Mr. Reuter, I don't know who wants to take that, or Mr. Livesey?
Tyler, can you respond to that one?
Sure. So we took a look at, I guess I'll start with the first one. So we took a look at the volume comparison and the directions that they were going. And the guidebooks these days have a comparison that you can do that evaluates the amount of circulating traffic that's going around versus the amount of traffic that's trying to enter. And all of the approaches were near the threshold that you're looking for. The one that's of concern is the Hancock approach, where there's a lot of volume trying to come out of there, and there's a lot of volume circulating at the same time. However, we think slowing down the volume enough will open up enough gaps for them to get out easier than they do now. The second is about like a metering signal. I think that would be more for a larger scale type intersection than you might see here. I think the idea here is to accommodate all of the circulating volume with as the least amount of equipment as we can. So that's part of the reason why the shape is a little bit strange in comparison to what you might see.
Thank you. Mr. Black, does that answer your question sufficiently?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank you and the board for making this session so we can learn about this. I really appreciate the openness and the information.
Thank you. Next, I see Ruth Ladd.
Hi, thank you. This has been a great presentation. I just wanted to express my support for all 3 points around the green, the changes that are proposed. I've walked it and biked it and driven it, and I'm one of the statistics. I was hit it from the side, somebody coming off of Hancock Street, didn't stop for the stop sign, blinds just whacked me in the side. And just having to only look to the left as you're going into these rotaries, essentially, instead of constantly having to look back and forth when you come to the intersection, will just make things so much easier, I think. You'll have to pay attention, of course, to pedestrians, but it looks like the way you're doing the crosswalks is going to make that a lot easier than the way it is now. So all the points all the way around the green. I really support this fully. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Ladd, just for the minutes, can you please give us your address as well?
Oh, I beg your pardon. 15 Pine Knoll Road.
Thank you very much. And next we have Dave Armstrong.
Hello, yeah, my name's Dave Armstrong. I live at 21 Hayward Avenue.
Thank you.
I'm a member of the Bicycle Advisory Committee. I've been studying roundabouts as part of that. I just want to reiterate how good an idea, how good a design I think this is. I've been a bicycle commuter for several decades. I've ridden past, my commute brought me past the Battle Green for the last decade. Having this speed slowing on that stretch is going to be so good for everyone. It's good for the cars too, but especially good for the bikes. The other intersections in this plan, I think, are also really welcome improvements for cyclists and pedestrians as well. I think the point about the reduction in conflict points is really important, and as Ruth Ladd just said, having drivers only have to look to the left to see what's in the intersection, and then only have to look to the right when they're leaving the intersection, makes things simpler for drivers, and that plus the low speeds will make things safer for cyclists and pedestrians. So, the narrowing, the placement of the crosswalks, and the simplicity of navigating this intersection for cars and cyclists, I think make this a terrific proposal.
Thank you.
So that's my statement.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And I see next it's listed as George Sacerdote. I don't know if it's George or Carol, but whichever Sacerdote we have, you're next.
Okay, Carol, go ahead.
Hello, yes, it's both of us. And we live at 15 Loring Road. We at one point in our lives, we lived in England, where there are many roundabouts, and we found them very difficult and confusing. So I'm afraid it sounds as though we're the first ones to say that we actually would prefer not to have a roundabout. But my main reason for opposing a roundabout is from looking at the presentation that had design option comparisons in it that was on the town website, I believe. And the design options that include traffic signals, in the pro column, it says full pedestrian and bicycle protection. And there were two different options that had traffic signals. So I'm very surprised about what the Bicycle Advisory Committee is saying, because the town's own study said that there was better protection with traffic lights for both bicyclists and pedestrians. And it seems to me that that should be our highest priority. And
Yeah,
George,
I have one addition.
I'm sorry, Mr. Malloy, you're not on mute.
Oh,
Okay. One addition to my wife's comments. I'm George Sacerdote. And that
You have
is,
about
if
20
the
seconds left.
traffic around the circle is going to be slower than the high-speed traffic coming in from Hancock Street and from Bedford Street, what you're going to create is backups, because especially during the busy hours. And so the argument against traffic lights that there was going to be idling is sort of negated by the fact that the slowness of the circle is going to cause backups on the side streets.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Livesey, do you have any comment regarding the consideration of the traffic lights and or the comparison to safety?
There may be a misinterpretation of that slide that's on the website, stating it doesn't state specifically that traffic signals are safer. They do provide what's called a protected crossing for pedestrians with the stoplight. But from the research that I have seen, the accident rates are higher typically at signalized intersections, and the accidents are more severe at signalized intersections than they are at roundabouts. Red light running is actually a pretty significant and has been increasing over the years, particularly recently. It's one of the highest rates of accidents. So, and the other point with traffic backing up during peak hours, both signals and roundabouts will have some traffic backing up. There's a balancing of the intersection, with allowing the other legs to get in easier, and less driver frustration from those legs, which makes the drivers less aggressive. But during non-peak hours, roundabout will be more free flowing than the signal, which will result in more stops and idling.
Thank you. I see next. I'm not sure why I'm getting terrible echo all of a sudden. Ms. Counts-Klebe.
Thanks. I'm Margaret Counts-Klebe. I live at 8 Hancock Avenue, which is a small side street a little bit further up from this diagram. But I'm more curious if we could I just ask a question about the change in the crosswalk pattern down by the Doll Green and the burying ground, because I am sort of unclear as to why the crosswalk was moving from in front of First Parish Church, where there's a lot of crossing all the time of tourists going over to look at the church, as well as going around to the burial ground, which really isn't a pedestrian cut through for people who are just, for instance, like me walking my dog around the green. So I was just kind of curious about if you could just review again why those crosswalks have changed in the way they are.
Okay, Mr. Livesey.
Kim, could you go back to that slide? Yes. Ken or Tyler, do you want to discuss the changes that were made at this particular location?
Yeah, John, Madam Chair, if I may, Ken Ho with Peter. So I think this intersection right here, as Tyler had indicated, what we're trying to do is, in addition to reducing the number of conflict points compared to the island shape configuration that you have, what this present is the reduction in the crossing of pedestrian for this intersection. And as you can see, the crosswalk is very simplified and it's short compared to today, where you have to cross island more than one travel lane. So the T configuration provides a more a conventional and reduced crossing time and providing a better sight line for pedestrians. So that's this intersection right here.
And I would just like to add, one of the goals of the connectivity was to get people to recognize that the old burying ground was there. It's much harder to realize and see that it's there when you're in the Battle Green area, whereas the First Parish Church is quite visible. So that's part of the connectivity, is to provide that direction to people so that more of the sites are obvious to people for access.
Thank you. Thank you both. Ms. Counts-Klebe, does that answer your question?
Well, I suppose it's just that I didn't understand that the purpose of this was mainly to, I mean, I know tourism is a big deal. It's just that for, I don't think it's really appropriate for people to, for instance, just if you were going for a walk as a Lexingtonian, to always cut through the burying ground, which is sort of what this is forcing you to do. It's just a much further crossing point than if you were to be able to cross at the church or somewhere else on Harrington Road. It just doesn't really strike me as that friendly to the people who walk around there, because I feel a little funny cutting through the burial ground if I weren't just there to look at the sites. I just find it a little awkward to be directing people towards the cemetery. But anyway, that does answer my question. Thanks very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
If I may, this is Tyler again. Just if you zip back to that real quick, apologies. So one of the things in terms of connectivity is with this, we're creating a T intersection, right? And so if we were to keep the crosswalk where the church is, that would effectively be a mid-block crosswalk that's offset from where the stop sign and the actual intersection is. So the safer option is to put that crossing right in front of the stop sign so that all the vehicles that are turning onto Harrington Road can actually see those pedestrians up front. Otherwise, they wouldn't see the pedestrians until they've already made their maneuver. And so that kind of creates a weird conflict there for vehicles approaching that crosswalk. So I think the location here really brings those pedestrians out to the forefront so that they're visible for the cars.
Thank you.
Just, can I add one more piece of clarity? That crosswalk doesn't force you to walk through the burying ground. It brings you, the sidewalk still runs along Mass Ave, so you can continue. If you were walking, you can continue along Mass Ave along the sidewalk, but you'd be walking by the driveway that accesses the burying ground, so you'd have more visibility to know that it's there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Livesey. Ms. Fortman, I see you next.
Okay, there. Can you hear me?
Yep. And apologize. It was Mr. and Mrs.
We're both here. 5 Harrington Road, just to the left of that picture. We go through that intersection constantly on foot, by bicycle, by car. We know it inside out. And I want to heartily endorse the roundabout for all the reasons already stated by Ms. Gow and Mr. Armstrong. This will be far, far safer for everyone than what we have now. And when I go When I go out on bicycles with my grandchildren, I tell them to use the crosswalks. And when I go out by myself, I ride the intersections. And when the roundabout is there, I'll do the same thing. I'll ride it myself and I'll tell them to use the crosswalks. And that's one of the beauties of this arrangement, is it caters to both sets of people. The ones who are experienced and confident cyclists will use the roundabout as designed. And the people who are less, who are more concerned about safety, use the crosswalks. And I do want to address one other thing. Whoever brought up the traffic lights, I would like to say at the bike committee, they discussed this, and traffic lights are not so great. Well, there's a lot of reasons you don't want one there, but they're not so great on a bicycle, because when you make a left turn on a bicycle, you're out in a left turn lane and you're very vulnerable. And a roundabout is better for that. So I'm going to stop because Carla wants to say something.
You have about 16 seconds.
Okay, I was hit at the Minuteman Statue intersection, and this is a great solution. I heartily endorse all three changes.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to hear that. Wendy Riesenberg, I see you next.
Hello, Wendy Riesenberg, 16 Garfield Street, town meeting member, precinct 8. I really have more questions than an opinion. First of all, that roundabout is near the fire station, and I just wonder if in a high traffic time, if there's an accident, say in Lexington Center, for example, and traffic is blocked there so that the roundabout fills up, I'd be concerned if emergency vehicles could get through the intersection, whereas in the old method, they could use the wrong lane, if you will. So I would just be wondering if the fire department had weighed in on that. My other thing is, looking as a pedestrian, I frequently use Bedford Street where it connects with Sunny Knoll Road near the DPW. I use it every day, and I see a big difference between summer and winter, because in the summer, there's a lot of bicyclists out and they push that pedestrian activated light to cross at the bikeway, and that pulses the traffic enough for me to get out. And in the winter, there's fewer bikers, so that light isn't used as much, and I have a great deal of trouble getting out. And I think that's going to translate, I'm concerned it will translate into the roundabout as a pedestrian, that there's always traffic moving, and I think it's going to be harder for people to cross. And I'm concerned about people being able to see them if they're, say, on the Harrington Street, the Hancock Street pedestrian crossway, a car coming in and making the turn off of Bedford Street won't necessarily see that pedestrian. So I'm concerned about the lack of pulsing, that the traffic will never stop in any way. And I don't know what can be done about it. I think generally roundabouts make a lot of sense. They've certainly helped in my daughter's neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Livesey, do you want to either address or field those two questions, the fire department and the pedestrian safety?
Yes, as far as the fire department is concerned, I spoke to the chief before we even presented to the select board the first time. Actually, both the police chief and the fire chief, to make sure that they were comfortable with the roundabout, particularly at this location, which is an area that they use regularly for obvious reasons. And they both expressed comfort with the design. As far as safety is concerned, the accident data for roundabouts is quite positive for pedestrian safety. And part of the reason is the speeds, slowing people down quite a bit for crossings. Also, as you can see, a lot of these crossings have a protected island in the middle. So you're not necessarily worried about crossing 2 lanes of traffic at a time. You can cross one and then wait till there's a gap to cross the other. So I think 3 of these 4 legs provide that additional refuge.
Thank you. It also appears to me, am I correct, that the crosswalks have been pulled back a little further from the intersections in at least 2 or 3 of the directions?
That is correct.
Thank you. All right, next, Yifeng Gong. You should be able to unmute.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Okay. My name is Yifeng. I'm living at the 23 Rawson Avenue. I'm also a committee member at Precinct 1. Well, what I want to say is, I'm also biking quite often. I'm always confused at the roundabout. So I'm not sure why people believe the roundabout is safe for the bikers. And my wife actually also almost got an accident last year, maybe 2 years ago, around the roundabout. So that's one thing. That's just one comment. Another is we have rezoning at Hartwell Avenue. My understanding is if there's a lot of companies there, this might change the traffic demand quite a lot. I'm just wondering whether the current design accommodates that kind of change. Yeah, thank you. That's all my question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Livesey.
So for Hartwell Ave, that expansion on Hartwell Ave could bring some additional traffic here, but the design does account for increased traffic. Most of a good portion of the Hartwell Ave traffic actually disperses onto the highway. So you're not going to have the volumes that you might expect coming through here from Hartwell Ave, but the design does have some additional capacity. As far as bicycle safety, as was mentioned by one of the previous residents, I believe it was Mr. Fortman, there are a few options for bikes. One is for the biker that's comfortable with staying in the road. You can stay in the road on a roundabout and be with much slower vehicle speeds than you would on the road currently without a roundabout, where the speeds are in excess of 30 miles an hour. And with a roundabout, it buffers them down to more of a 20-mile-an-hour speed. So both, it adds comfort and it also adds safety. If you were to get hit by a vehicle going 20, not that you'd want to, but it's a lot less severe, the potential injuries, than if the vehicle's going 30. But also does allow for those less comfortable bikers to exit the roadway easily onto the abutting sidewalks and traverse the intersection that way. So it gives a secondary safe route to get around and through that intersection.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'd
Yes.
just like to add on. So I think, as John had indicated, research has indicated that roundabout are, as safe as, any other intersection configurations, whether it's bicycle or a pedestrian accommodation. So, personally, we have designed, this is not the first roundabout that we have designed. We have designed many roundabouts, and we have not, encountered any safety, related concern related to pedestrian and bicycle associated with the roundabout. So I think our personal experience validate the research that's being done for a roundabout.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Can I
Mr.
ask-
Gong, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I know there's some research, but I'm just wondering, when people say we have other choice, yeah, but I agree, because we have a minimum bikeway next to it. So basically, if you talk about other choice, basically you are telling bikes, hey, if you don't, just don't using this roundabout. I don't feel comfortable about this kind of answer. So I agree that the current one is very dangerous. Yeah, I had an accident of a car accident there, but when you say this is safer for bikers, I don't think so. And I don't get a clear answer why it's safer for bikers, because you are reciting some research, but I'm saying not only me, all the people bike with me, no one really comfortable at the roundabout.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Gong. All right, so we have been at this a little bit, so I am going to let everybody who has not yet spoken. So, but I'm going to say, Mr. Cantor.
Thank you. David Cantor, 48 Pfeiffer Lane, town meeting member 7 and vice chair, but speaking just for myself from the Capital Expenditures Committee. First point, have there been some throughput analyses based on the slowing of the traffic through? Will it have any potential for diverting traffic to other roads that have not been analyzed? So that's one question. The next question deals with the timing of the funding. There was a display of a news item that said construction would be focused for the following year. And my question is, I don't like putting money in a bank for something that delayed. Are there any intermediate actions that were contemplated that don't require the nearly $5 million to be allocated that much in advance of when we'll be soliciting? And therefore, we've had some very bad recent experiences with the market causing a bigger change than we want, and I'd like to avoid a supplemental policy. And the third item is in the diagram that was shown by the library, with the crosswalks being close to the intersections. I'm wondering whether that really enhances safety or challenges safety, because people turning from the left lane to go down Mass Ave are going to be faced with a crosswalk, and I can see cars being stopped in midstream. So I'm concerned a little bit about that design and the risk it puts up instead of the risk it avoids. But the most important one, turning from my committee head, I'm concerned about the timing of the funding versus the timing of the construction. And shouldn't we be going after only the money we need in order to be ready for a fall special town meeting to provide the funding for the construction that isn't going to start until the following calendar year? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cantor. Mr. Livesey, do you want to take those?
Yeah, I'm going to take the funding one and then pass the other two over to Tyler.
Thank you.
As far as the funding is concerned, we are, as Mr. Cantor stated, we're looking to construct calendar year 2023 so that the project can be ready in time for the 2025 celebration. The timing of the funding, if we receive funding in the spring, the funding isn't really available to us to use until the summer. So spring town meeting 2023 would be too late because we'd miss half the construction season. With that said, I believe if I heard Mr. Cantor correctly, he suggested the potential of a fall town meeting. If it's fall 2022, then that timing does not affect our ability to get it done before 2025. But that would be the latest town meeting that we'd be able to get funding in order to meet the goals to have it completed before the celebration. We just typically, our guidance is to put capital articles in for spring town meeting, because that's the one that we know will happen, although we tend to always have a fall.
Thank you, Mr. Livesey. And yes, and I think the board policy has been that we would prefer to do that as well, because we don't want to have to build in the fall, although it has been somewhat regular. For the other two parts of the questions, you were going to turn it over to someone from one of the two gentlemen with you from Beta. Who wants it, Mr. Ho, Mr. DeRuyter?
I could start and then Ken can jump in with anything added. This is Tyler DeRuyter. We can start with this one because you've got it up on screen. So the crosswalk, I think the commenter is talking about the crosswalk going from the statue to the island, and then from the island to the overall the library side almost. So the intention here is to push the crosswalk as close to the intersection as we can. That increases the visibility for those left turning cars to be able to see the pedestrians there before they make their move. So the intention is that they would sit within the left turn lane, traveling north or west, whichever way you want to talk about it, before they make their move and yield to the pedestrians there first. So, you know, I don't know that they would fully be blocking that southbound or eastbound travel lane, so to speak, if that's the question.
Believe so.
And then I can move to the other one, which was the throughput. So we did a number of analyses runs with some different software based out in the guidebooks. And while the approach from Hancock Street does see probably the most delay or you know, time that they would have to sit there for a gap, it's significantly better than the existing stop sign. And that's because we're bringing the Bedford Street vehicles into a yield, slowing them down and opening up gaps that don't exist today while people are waiting at the stop sign. So there is a lot of volume there, we realize that, but this case addresses it in a way that is better than the existing stop sign.
Yeah, if I may, I think if it's anything else, this roundabout design, the advantage of a roundabout versus traffic light, I know that was brought up, is that in terms of capacity, this intersection is, you know, very heavily traveled. The roundabout design will be able to process more cars compared to a traffic light. So that's a fact. In terms of the two types of treatment for this intersection. Just to go back to the other location, you know, my apologies. And the one thing that when we looked at it at the other intersection is the crosswalk where we have it shown as part of the design section of the other location of Bedford and Mass Ave. I'm sorry. Yeah, if you look at the crosswalk right at Mass Ave, today when we were out there doing our investigation, a lot of tourists actually just stand right in the middle of where the crosswalk is, just because of the location of the Minutemen, because they want to get a nice background, you know, so they actually walk in the middle of the roadway to you know, take pictures. So part of this design is to try to, you know, if there's anything else, alleviate that concern with pedestrian safety towards standing in the middle of the roadway, is to, you know, bring that crosswalk where it is. They could stand at the island, actually, you know, in the middle there to take pictures. And so that's the pedestrian safety component. In terms of the left turn, you know, the crosswalk is no different than any conventional T intersection where, you know, they would have to yield to pedestrian when they make that left turn.
Okay, thank you very much. I am gonna note we are at 10 after 8. I do still see there are a few people who haven't spoken yet, so I'm gonna give those people an opportunity to speak, but I am going to remind everyone that there is an opportunity as well to send in your comments either to Mr. Livesey, jlivesey@lexingtonma.gov, or to the select board @lexingtonma.gov. I'm Nick Gall. Mr. Gall?
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, hi, Nick Gall, 12 Hancock Avenue, for over 20 years. So we've dealt on pretty much a daily basis with the intersection of Hancock Street and Bedford Street. And I'm just delighted to see that we're finally going to do something about it. And I wholeheartedly support the Rotary. I will point out, I think some other speakers have done the same, that that intersection is so intimidating that most of the backup you see, and it's extensive, we regularly see the traffic back up to our street on Hancock Avenue, which is, you know, I don't know, hundreds of yards up on Hancock Street. We see it on a regular basis, and mainly because people are afraid to make that crossing across Bedford Street. So this looks like it's going to improve the traffic flow and at the same time serve as traffic calming. So it has my hearty support. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ms. McKenna. John, you should be able to unmute.
There we go. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Don McKenna, 9 Hancock Street, living right at this particular intersection. Also chairman of the Tourism Committee and Precinct 9 town meeting member. So I just want to reiterate for everybody on the call, 2 things. Number one, this is not just a recent project. 25 years ago, when I sat on the Board of Selectmen, we were working on this intersection. And there's really reasons why this intersection has not been changed for a long period of time, because there really aren't a lot of good solutions. But I do want to point out that the Tourism Committee has been in full agreement with the intersection of Mass Ave and Harrington Road. And to answer an earlier question, part of the reason for that grass there and walking into the burying ground is because we did spend a lot of time in developing the Battle Green Master Plan, watching the traffic patterns from people walking from the visitor center area across. And so it is important that there's an area where a tour group, a bus load is 55 people, can safely cross and stand as they're moving along. Also, the intersection at Bedford and Mass Ave and Clark Street, we're very pleased with it. Again, very respectful of what's going on there and probably the best way. The disappointing part is we really weren't included in the process in the last few years leading up to the intersection at Harrington Road. And so, you know, I'm not going to go into a lot of details because you've heard from me before, but what I do want to say is that part of the solution for the Harrington Road intersection, as the person who watches that traffic every day, my office is right there. I've seen a lot of the accidents, and they primarily come from people coming down Harrington Road across to Hancock Street without stopping or slowing. And putting in the slip lane at Mass Ave is going to make a huge impact on that. And I hate to see us do this before we see that impact, as is some of the markings on the road. And I think on balance, just to sort of end my comments, is we're really talking about historic context of where this is versus how much traffic we need to accommodate. And the signage and all the time we've spent taking down signage is all going to go up here for this intersection. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, but 2 quick comments, one or comment and a question. One is, do consider that you are taking away a big swath of land there that does provide viewing for the Patriots Day Parade, especially as we're coming into 2025. And I have a question I'd like to
Ms. McKenna, please.
Yeah, I just have a question I'd like them to answer and I'm done. So I don't fully understand, as you're coming from Lexington Center and starting to the right to Hancock Street, there's a big swatch of pavement or black showing roadway. I don't understand what that is, because that looks like that goes into the Battle Green Master Plan area, into the road, into the area there that absolutely we shouldn't be adding to. So that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Livesey?
I'm sorry, Ms. McKenna, could you repeat the location? I didn't catch it.
I think she means that black arm on the right-hand side that goes off towards the, towards the
my house.
tavern.
Yeah.
Down
No,
one, Kim, down, Kim.
Yeah.
There,
No.
the one that goes off at like 4 o'clock. There you go.
So that the gray that
The-
goes
No.
along there?
No, the
No.
thing that's going out to the right at about 3:30. Below where Kim's at, that's it.
Right there? Okay, that's the relocation of the driveway for that property at that corner on Hancock Street that abuts the Minuteman commuter bikeway. The driveway currently is a little further up, almost to the point of, not quite, but almost to the point of the crosswalk. And without relocating that driveway further down, that residence would be essentially forced to take a right out of the driveway. But by moving the driveway further down, it allows access to the roundabout so that coming out of that driveway, you can go in any direction.
Thank you. All right, Lyle Swanson.
Yes, I'm here actually, Lyle Swanson from 10 Belfry Terrace in Lexington. I'm here on behalf of Hancock Church. So most of my comments actually relate to the other side of the green from where the roundabout is. And just want to say that we're very much in, Hancock Church is actually very active in the, as a community center. We have a number of activities that take place from a nursery school to enrichment programs and so on. So the Hancock Church has a lot of vehicle and pedestrian traffic that comes out, ranging from early in the morning all the way through to late into the evening. So a number of our concerns have to do with things like the parking along that area and street lighting. I don't know if this plan at this point has any information regarding street lighting. For pedestrian safety and for the ease of seeing vehicles coming in and out of the church parking lots at night.
Mr. Livesey? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
We have not gotten to the point of the design of the lighting for the Battle Green yet. But what we'd be looking to do is follow the recommendations that are in the Battle Green Master Plan for lighting.
Thank you. Mr. Swanson?
Yeah, I would stress that it's important to make sure that we have adequate lighting at those driveways and at the crosswalks, given the amount of evening traffic and pedestrian traffic that's there. Another question would have to do with parking in there. Is you've got a number of parking spaces that are along that area. One of which actually has a hydrant adjacent to it currently. Are you planning on relocating fire hydrants in this? Are there plans for handicap spaces, things of that nature along there?
Mr. Livesey?
We haven't gotten into the detail of on this plan to see if any hydrants need to be relocated. However, if they did, then we would certainly do that. It's something we do regularly on our projects. And Tyler or Ken, do you want to touch on the handicap parking question? Not sure we have gotten into the detail on that yet, but if you have any information.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that level of detail. If it's anything else, we would be maintaining what's out there. And as part of the process, if there's a need for more, certainly that's going to be considered.
The other comment I'd like to say is that we're very much in favor of the way you're redesigning the end of Harrington Street, where it comes into Mass Ave at a right angle, and adding the crosswalks in that area. Right now, there's a total lack of crosswalks in that area, and we regularly see pedestrians desperately trying to get across Mass Ave to the Green and to Harrington Street in that area. One comment that came up was whether or not you're looking at things like pedestrian activated lights for some of these crosswalks, where a pedestrian could just simply indicate and have flashing yellow lights that would draw the attention to vehicles that pedestrians are trying to cross. And there are a number
Mr. Swanson, we're starting.
that
Mr.
would be
Swanson,
helpful.
you're okay. Thank you. I was gonna say you're starting to break up and your time is up coinciding. So Mr. Livesey, I think the question was quickly just whether or not there was any consideration of pedestrian operated flashers for crosswalks.
We have not considered that in the location in this project, mainly because of the historical nature.
Thank you. All right, and Mr. Michelson, I believe you are the last of the people who have not yet had an opportunity to speak. So thank you. Go ahead. Thank you for waiting.
Just, this is Jerry Michelson of 3 Clyde Place. I'm the chair of the Senate committee, but I'm speaking on my own tonight. Just want to point out a couple of things. The 20-mile-an-hour speed zone has already been implemented, and that I hadn't heard that at all in the conversation. And that is preceding any of these intersections coming in from Bedford. So the traffic is already being slowed down. Another thought I was wondering about is the coming out of Harrington Road and looking left has always been that challenge because the road bends back a bit and there's a fence that you can mostly see through. But that driver is now set back even further. And I'm just trying to understand the logic of that sighting there. And then the third part is truck leaving Lexington Center heading to Bedford or heading to the highway. How is a larger truck handling that offset circle with the greens and the red you drive over and the green you don't? It looks like a straight line coming into the center, but outbound. Just a thought process on how you guys got to that drawing here.
Thank you. Mr. Livesey.
So let me respond to the 20-mile-an-hour one and then pass the other two questions over to Tyler or Ken. As far as the 20-mile-an-hour is concerned, yes, those speed limit signs were put up within the last year for the safety zone through the downtown area, although it's strictly signage. And what we have found is that signage does little for speed reduction, and road design does much more for speed reduction than signage. So the roundabout and the deflection will significantly buffer those speeds for people coming both into the center, and will keep people from speeding up that are coming out of and heading north towards Bedford. It'll keep them slowed until they get past the Battle Green and out past the roundabout as well. And Tyler or Ken, can you follow up on the other two questions?
I could take it. This is Tyler from Beta. So the truck travel around the circle, the way that the guidebooks define it is that the cab of the truck will travel along the paved section, and then the trailer of the truck could track over what's colored in red. So that would be, you know, some kind of a textured thing to discourage cars from driving over it, but it would allow the larger vehicles to track over as needed to maneuver around. The green, we would not want anybody on. That would be a raised structure to formalize the circular motion of the cars.
Thank you. Mr. Michelson, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, and just the Harrington sightline looking left. I was just curious about the thought process behind that.
The Harrington, so you're talking about coming out of Harrington and looking left on the 90-degree corner that's there. Yeah, so we are trying to push where the yield condition is further over. So it's almost kind of south and east from where it is now, in an effort to direct cars to the right to go around the circle. So that will help in combination with vehicles yielding coming southbound. So if the yield lines aren't shown on this sketch or where the signs are, but if you make an imaginary line basically where the island stops, that's roughly where you would pull up to yield.
Thank you.
Yeah, the approach, I'm sorry,
Oh,
The
go ahead. I'm
approach,
sorry.
yeah, Madam Chair. So the approach to the circle from Harrington is actually flare out more. I know it's, yeah, you can't really see it. So that does improve the sight line for, you know, looking at the corner at Bedford and Harrington.
Thank you. All right, I am going to remind everybody once more that you can send any additional questions to Mr. Livesey, as you can see on the screen, or if you're listening, jlivesey@lexingtonma.gov. This is also on the town page under the Battle Green Streetscape through the engineering department. You can also send your thoughts to selectboard@lexingtonma.gov. And we thank everyone. We had about 60 people here this evening, so thank you all for listening and for contributing to the process. We appreciate it very much. Mr. Livesey, Mr. Malloy, do you need anything else from the board this evening on this?
Not necessarily at this meeting, but what we would need is once you get that further feedback that people send to you, we'll ultimately need direction to know if we should be pursuing this design further or not. You know, we don't want to dive too deep and spend too much of the town's funds designing it if it's not something that you want furthered. So that's the direction that we'll need.
Okay, thank you. We will put this back on a select board agenda for discussion after we have had a chance to let people who may not have been able to attend this evening catch up and send in any comments as well. Ms. Barry.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. I know this is kind of on the fly, but if this is coming up at Springtown meeting, do you have it do you want to give an idea of how long people have to submit? It's February 1st. What date are you closing them off? And maybe that should go on the website tomorrow morning as well.
So I may need to think about that for a minute. I think it is probably a little too soon for us to discuss it next week. The 15th is a possibility. We don't have a meeting the week of school vacation, so then the next opportunity would be the 28th, and I would guess, Mr. Livesey, is that too late if we were to push this to the 28th to give people a week or so and then give ourselves a week or so?
No, that would work.
Okay.
If I could suggest, just because it might make it easier, is if you give people 2 weeks until February 15th to comment, and then the board we can put all those comments together and provide a response to the board. And then the night that the board is actually voting on the article that's on what your position is on the town meeting is when you would really need to take some sort of a position on how we were moving forward.
Okay.
And the board obviously have discussions, you know, once we have the comments in, we have more
On all the
information.
articles.
So
Right.
we can, if that's agreeable, we can put on the website that people should submit their comments. We can put the 2 email addresses. So if somebody wasn't writing as quickly as you were talking, that we can, or if they don't know how to spell Livesey, we can get all that on the website tomorrow and have until the 15th.
Okay, so I would say that perhaps then that is next Friday. So that would be the rest of this week and all of next week, which would be, I believe, the 11th. So through the comments through the 11th of February. Okay, thank
and we'll
you.
also post this video once it's available from Lex Media on the website for those that want to rewatch it or were unable to attend.
Correct. And this presentation, the slide deck, is available through the select board meeting packet. Is it also on the engineering page?
It will be this week. Now that we've had this meeting, we'll post that on our web page as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I think we are going to move on now to our second item this evening, which is to continue our conversation regarding the use of ARPA funds. In our packet this evening was a spreadsheet from Mr. Malloy, which covered both his and the staff's recommendations, what we have already approved, additional items that are sort of pending or that have been either suggested or recommended. and as well as an outline of a process for participatory budgeting, assuming that we all still want to pursue that, which I believe I have heard from around this table. So I think what probably makes sense, Mr. Malloy, is for you to walk us through the spreadsheet of the memorandum, the recommendation spreadsheet that was in the memorandum. And then perhaps we can contribute our thoughts as we go through that. And then we can turn to the participatory budgeting as a secondary item. Does that seem acceptable?
That sounds fine to me. We also, Sandia Iyer and I believe.
Yes, I'm sorry. About the
Another
pop-up project. I'm
pop-up
sorry.
business will be here to present. So essentially, there are a number of requests that the board has received before. I highlighted these in yellow on this spreadsheet that the board has already seen. Then there are two, the pop-up business incubator and funding the SPRD consultant, are new items that have come up since I provided the original list to the board. And so the items that we're recommending, or that I'm recommending right now, I'm making the recommendation that the board consider is first the Lexington Retailers Association's Discovery Day, Halloween Walk, Holiday Lighting, and Taste of Lexington is really meant to help offset some of the costs that the Retailers Association has picked up in the past. And it's, trying to expand and strengthen the businesses that are in the center of town and attract more people to these events. The second item is a rebuild on the tourism website for the visitor center. As we're in the process of redoing the town's overall website, but the tourism website wasn't included in that rebuild. And so that would be an additional effort. And what's been requested is $25,000. Again, Cindy Iyer is here and will be able to talk to a number of these issues. The board has specific questions. There's a storefront improvement plan that when one of the things that we've been meeting and doing, and this is based on one of the board's goals, is meeting with both smaller local businesses and then larger corporations in town. And when we've met with the smaller businesses, we've heard about a need to do improvements to storefronts and to store backs, especially for those businesses that back onto the Minuteman Bike Lane. The next item is the participatory budget set aside, and the draft guidelines, whatever you want to call it, that I put together are really based on what the city of Cambridge does with their program. They've been doing it for about 8 or 9 years now, and have had really great success. So they've got very broad guidelines and gives them a lot of discretion on what they want to do with it. I made it a little bit more specific that not only would any requests need to obviously comply with ARPA guidelines, but that they should also be consistent with the select board's goals, what we're trying to achieve in the community. And Kim, could you go back to the other page? Or I've got it on my other, hang on, I'll get to it. So there are a couple of other ones. On the bikeway, and then there's the pop-up business incubator, which specifically, I'm sorry, I skipped the fund the SPRD consultant. That's something that obviously is something the select board has been working on for a couple of years. We're at a point right now where we're getting close to being completed, but there's additional work, Mr. Patter, or
Mr. Malloy, you're getting far away from your speaker again, or something's happening with your speaker. You got to stay right up close to that microphone.
The microphone. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. As you can tell, I'm in different office space right now, and I moved everything, and so it might take a couple of days to get things quite right. So the SPRD consultant, as I was saying, the project is getting close to being completed. There is some additional consulting work that Ms. Hay has identified and asked that we consider funding. And right now, ARPA would be the funding source, and it does comply with the requirements. The next item is a pop-up business incubator. And again, we'll have a presentation on this. The idea is to, and you've probably seen these, there's one on Newberry Street in Boston, where they've taken one of the vacant storefronts and they have different pop-up businesses in there pretty much every month. And then moving, and those are all the items that would fall under the category of addressing negative economic impacts. And then under supporting public health, we have 6 replacement bottle filling stations along the bikeway. In a lot of cases, including our own building here, we've moved away from drinking fountains and gone to bottle filling stations. And these are items that were scheduled to be replaced. And the Public Works Department has requested that we do them as bottle filling stations instead of.
Come back.
I'm losing again.
Yep.
I believe that the microphone is built into the camera, so I'm getting really close to the camera for my video image for me to feel comfortable. But I
won't comment on your shave.
So the next item is LifePack AED devices. These are in the police cruisers, and they're used when somebody is obviously having a heart condition, and they are all at the end of their life right now and need to be replaced. And these were requested in the original ARPA request and never appeared anywhere else in the budget process. And there's something that we should really purchase in order to provide that service when it does need to be provided. And then the last item is something that was not on this the senior management team's original request, but when the select board went through that original list, asked that we include outdoor shelters for programming, the big tent that was at the community center this year. And so the number I put in there is the highest estimate that we have. The estimate was between $80,000 and $160,000, and we would obviously only spend what was necessary for it, and then we would report that back to the select board. And so those are the items that we're recommending right now. The other spreadsheets include this one is the items the select board has already approved, a number of requests that are not being considered right now based on the previous discussions the select board had, and that doesn't mean that they can't come back. It just means they're not being considered at this point in time. The next spreadsheet are those items that would be recommended to be funded in 23 or 24. Those are items that some of them we don't think it makes sense to put in or purchase a new parklet when we're in the middle of the center streetscape. It makes more sense to do it in a later year if it's still something that we want to do, or that they're multiple year funding things that we had talked about. And then the last page are things that were not really even recommended at the original list that was given to the board. I've kind of listed the reason in the far right hand column. And so that's pretty much it. And so if we could go back to, I don't know if you want to talk about the participatory budgeting or have the presentation on the pop-up business incubator next.
Why don't we do the pop-up incubator so that we have all the projects conceptually first, and then we can talk about how and what.
Sandy, should we also have Allison Yee promoted so she can participate in the discussion?
Yes, Mr. Malloy, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Just did that. Okay, great.
So just to start, good evening, everyone. So we've had several conversations regarding how to revitalize the center. We had the last discussion we had regarding ARPA was to help current businesses and to reduce the vacancies and help businesses through ARPA funding for rents, utilities, and other means through which they can survive this pandemic. But we also are seeing some vacancies that are not being filled, and for that we would definitely need to have recruitment. And one of the things to revitalize a downtown would be pop-up. As Mr. Malloy mentioned, there have been successful pop-ups in other places, and Allison E can talk more about Project Pop-Up, but they have had success in Newton, Needham, and Melrose, and they're basically their proposal is based on grants, and we had this conversation with them last week, and I believe they also reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, and you had a letter of support from the Chamber of Commerce regarding this project. I would actually give it to Allison to explain about the pop-up project and the successful model that they have created. Allison?
Sure. Hello, good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me tonight. My name is Allison Yee. I'm the founder and CEO of a locally based company called Up Next. And we facilitate all different types of non-traditional retail or pop-up experiences. And had the pleasure of developing Project Pop-Up, an expansion of what we already do around Greater Boston and beyond, to be in direct partnership with municipalities over this past summer. So we initially partnered with Newton, Needham, and then Melrose to launch pop-up incubator spaces, which essentially allow businesses of all different types to test out brick and mortar retail in a lower risk environment and incubate them for hopefully the long haul in the communities which they're testing. So we've had really wonderful experiences in these 3 communities to date, and developed a robust program that allows, a real partnership approach between the municipalities, the landlords, the emerging brands or businesses, and our company, to facilitate the entire process and make it as accessible and inclusive as possible. So I don't know if anyone has had a chance to look through the presentation materials. I'd be happy to walk you through them. We've got some case studies regarding sample spaces. I can certainly take you through the Project Pop-Up sort of numbers, the infographic, or the nuts and bolts of how this works, or simply open it up to questions. So whatever you think would be best.
Why don't you do the high level review, because there are also people who are, watching along with us who may not have had that opportunity to go through yet.
Sure. So Project Pop-Up is led by an application process. So essentially, we would work hand in hand to identify an incubator space, so a single storefront within the community that can be activated for a year and serve as a rotating location for businesses to come and pop up for 2 to 4 months at a time, sometimes as a standalone brand and sometimes in collaboration with other businesses, depending on the pool of applicants and the types of businesses and what they're seeking. So we run these types of application processes all the time, but essentially would put this out there to field interest from all different types of entrepreneurs, and then go through what we call a matchmaking process to determine who is the best fit for which season or time of year, and invite them to be a part of this space. So the goal is to have it be that accessible, reduced risk opportunity where it is not free rent, but it is subsidized. And then they're offered a lot of resources to help get traction, set up shop perhaps for the first time. We see a wide range of applicants. Some who are doing retail in a brick and mortar space for the very first time, who have either had an online, a direct to consumer business, or perhaps are just newer to running a business and want to get in front of more customers. But perhaps most importantly, to really test out being a part of the commercial scene, the local retail scene in a community. So for example, with Project Pop-Up, I'm wondering if we want to scroll through the deck a little bit. If you could just go to page, let's see. You could take a look at page 4. Yeah, that's great. So this is an example of one space that was activated during summer 2021 in Newton Highlands. This was originally home to 4 different businesses that collaborated together. It was one of the larger spaces, around 2,000 square feet, and really yielded a fantastic result in that the 2 of the 4 businesses are still popping up here together and have continued extending. And it's been a really dynamic experience for each of the participating businesses, but also for the community at large, where they've been able to grow their businesses, have this brick and mortar experience, host a series of different types of events. And they were perfect strangers when the process began. And now are partnering, in this case, 2 of the 4 are partnering for the long term, and they've all forged really strong relationships and networks within the community and want to continue doing business within the city of Newton. So that is one example. The next one is a similar scenario in Melrose, where they have since expanded beyond that storefront to fill 2 additional vacant storefronts in the Melrose community. And then if you'd like to scroll down to page 8, I believe, this is an infographic that illustrates sort of some of the numeric details of what this big picture has looked like to date for Project Pop-Up. So the pilot has run across 3 communities. Initial applicants were over 100 different brands. So brands meaning any type of entrepreneur or small business owner. And we activated a total of 8 storefronts for a minimum of 2 to 3 months and selected 15 of those brands to pop up. So that was a mix of standalone and shared spaces. And we've seen really amazing feedback in terms of how those businesses are being able to test the waters and then convert to longer term and permanent space occupants. So right now we're at 53% and counting who have converted from pop-up to permanent locations, and 93%. So that's actually all but one of the businesses of the 15 founders who have immediately gone on to extend their pop-ups or to do something in a neighboring area.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was gonna say, Lizzie, if you would actually just jump to like the financial model that I think it's under your incubator, I think that would help people understand what the request is.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So if you scroll down to page 10 and 11, there you go. So initially we ran this program for a shorter period of time across more storefronts, and have refined it to be more of a sustainable initiative where we can open an incubator space for a year-round presence and have the funding go into building out a space that is really meant for this type of rotation. So it would make popping up for these businesses, very streamlined in its experience. There's a whole layer of support that comes through the Project Pop-Up brand in terms of marketing, social media, community, and provides for things like fixtures and signage and POS systems, a lot of the typical hurdles for someone who's running a brick and mortar business for the first time. And we facilitate the entire process and work hand in hand to make sure that it's meeting the objectives of the community.
So, okay. So I guess I'm just going to jump in with one quick question because I wasn't clear on this part, which is that you provide all of this so that the business does not have that responsibility at all, or this, and then they have some element of it still. So for instance, the fixtures, the build out, the signage.
So everything needs to be customized to the brand, but we provide sort of the baseline for that. So whereas when you're doing a pop-up, as opposed to each individual business needing to provide all of the fixtures, invest in so many of those pieces that perhaps are only used for a short period of time or that they don't have the resources to access, we provide the baseline. So for example, shelving units and slat wall or whatever it may be for the shell of the retail experience. And then if they're a jeweler that has very specific setup for their smaller product, they bring in that component of it. Does that make sense?
Yep, got it. Thank you.
And just to
yep.
add, Madam Chair, we
Please.
did have conversations with local, what do you call, landowners, and yes, thank you. So we did have conversations with them as well. One of the reasons that pop-up has not been, I mean, Lexington has a pretty good pop-up experience so far. Maxima store is one of the examples of how pop-up has been successful in Lexington, bringing the business bookstore to Lexington. But one of the reasons that landowners have specified is the short period of time of 3 to 4 months doesn't give them that, that makes them nervous to give that space out for a pop-up. So one of the reasons that we like this proposal was because of the year-long commitment that that is being made here. Just wanted to add that that point. Thank you.
Thank you. And is this planned at one particular location, or is it? Unfortunately, we have plenty of opportunities in Lexington Center right now.
So this would be, yeah, go ahead, Alex.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we did have a discussion about that, and it does make sense to have it at one particular location, but have 3 or 4 different businesses come in each 3 to 4 months. So the rotation keeps on there, and it will be a longer commitment for that landowner.
Thank you. So sorry, I jumped in with all of my questions first. Does anybody else, while we have both Ms. Yee and Ms. Iyer on the line, so to speak, does anybody have any specific questions about this program? Mr. Pato?
Right, so you got the question, which was location and landlord participation, I think is gonna be key. And the other one is, Ms. Iyer, are we simplifying any of the regulatory processes, in particular things like signage outdoors, to be changed quickly for new businesses? I mean, I think that would be a necessary participation from the town side.
Thank you for that question. I wish we could make it simpler, and definitely signage has been an issue that has been brought up multiple times. As you can see, it has been built in the proposal, the signage as well as the permits. So we would definitely help the businesses do it as quickly as possible, but it has to go through the regulatory process that we have. I hope that answers the question, but I don't know if Mr. Molloy has anything to add to that.
Mr. Pato, did you have a follow-up?
Well, Mr. Molloy, while you're thinking, what I recommend is, see if we can put in a process to simplify the signage in this case, because I know that often businesses are waiting more than 3 months to be processed for a new blade sign or something like that, which would be the entire period one of these pop-ups would be there. So if we could work out something that will make this more workable.
Yeah, and Mr. Pato, that is one of the issues we heard when we went out and met with some local businesses. I know Mr. Lucenti was with us one night or one morning when we went to the bike shop in East Lexington, and it has taken them, Sandia would know exactly how long, but a lot longer than 3 months to get a sign permit. And so you're right that we would have to do something in order to get, maybe we do something like we get a general pattern approved, and then you could change it out as long as you stay with the same font and size and whatever. But that is a real serious issue.
I would ask this, if I may, I would ask this to Allison, because I thought that the major signage is that it's under the Project Pop-Up brand. The smaller signage would be something that goes on the the window, glass window, which I don't think so really needs that long of a regulatory process. It's pretty much something that can be done easily.
If I may, this is definitely something that we navigate with every single space and municipality in which we work. And typically the the path of least resistance is to utilize the window space. And if there's any, specific criteria regarding coverage, we work within that. And Project Pop-Up typically serves as the umbrella signage and entity, so it's recognizable and comes to be known as the incubator space. But then there is always billing available for the brand to be featured, to have their own storefront in whatever means are available. So whether that is streamlining the process and allowing for something overhead, or more typically in the window space and other areas of the shop.
All right, Mr. Lucente and then Ms. Berry.
So thanks for the presentation. This is very intriguing to me. I am curious though about past experience with food retail. I noticed one food, but it was packaged food. That seems like another hurdle perhaps. I just was wondering if you've had any past experience that was successful, or reasons that those type of incubator spaces would not be made available. And then I guess I think you alluded to the space size. I'd love to sort of understand, is the 1,000 square feet the right number? Is it some other number of square feet that would be sought after? And are we doing this exclusively in the center, or would this be in other parts of the town as well? Or have we explored putting it in other parts of the town as there's other parts of Lexington that are not in the center that could also use some pop-up space or some activity or some additional retail traffic. So those are my questions so far.
Sure, great, wonderful. I will try to run through the list, and please remind me if I've forgotten anything. But in terms of food, we definitely work in both the food and dry goods retail space. Food does present a little bit more of a permitting challenge in terms of making sure that the space and the brand that's popping up are up to code and go through the health department process. We are happy to navigate that if a space presents itself that is, a great fit. Often it's a second generation restaurant or cafe space. We provide like a checklist of criteria that we recommend to look for in terms of a space being the right fit. So typically it's on the smaller side, although it comes down to the layout and what is, the best use of the space. We often recommend pairing food and retail together because they feed off of one another and can really boost one another up. And in terms of the location, that is ultimately up to, what the priorities are for the town. That's why I've heard about the main corridor, but we're certainly open to other possibilities. If there's another area that needs this added vibrancy, that has a space that would be the right fit, open to any and all conversation on that front.
Mr. Lucente, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Petto. Mr. Lucente got most of my questions, but looking at, I think it's the slide that's up on the screen right now. So when we talk about 1 year, we're not really talking about you have like a tentative timeline there. We're not really talking about 1 year of people in the space. We're talking more about 9 months, correct?
Yeah, so I was actually just relooking at this sequence based on where we are on the calendar. It's February 1st, not January 1st. And I don't know sort of the timeline in which these approvals are typically made, but we'd be happy to shift dates slightly to accommodate and or get this off the ground, even more quickly as needed. Basically, it comes down to just hitting the right seasonality for businesses to be successful. So we were rounding out the year for December because that is when it makes the most sense to have kind of the pop-up come to a close and either extend for an additional year or have a business move in permanently to utilize January as their move-in period.
So I want to push a little bit on location. Do you have a specific location identified? I mean, we were talking center, then Mr. Lucente said somewhere else in town. I'm going to guess you've got a short list, I hope.
Ms. Iyer may be able to speak to that more, but to date, we've been speaking about the center.
We have been speaking about the center, given that the space that we are looking is 2,000 square feet and above. Not saying that we would not have such a space elsewhere, but definitely the vibrancy piece of it We've had conversations with some of the center, what do you call, landowners who are interested in a pop-up, but haven't seen that kind of an interest from other spots such as East Lexington.
Okay, so I'm just going to push a little bit harder on the timeline part. So you're kind of having these conversations, you're looking at the center, but are you getting the sense from the landlords that they're going to be able to act on this, where this is, you know, a 12-month period? And that the space is going to be ready, or is this going to, and I know maybe there's no crystal ball, but let's say we approve this tonight, you go out, you look for space. At what point do you think, you know, you'll have your first people in there? Do you have kind of clients lined up to take the space?
I would say we have quite a bit of pent up demand for this type of opportunity. We continue to receive applications, even though all of our project pop-up applications are currently closed. In terms of the timeline, you know, pop-ups are sort of a fast-paced industry or world within the retail, you know, space. So we are used to turning things around very quickly. And the brands that take advantage of these types of opportunities are also understanding that they need to move very quickly. So I don't have a crystal ball, but essentially if this moves forward, it's something that we would work hand in hand to mobilize quickly. And typically landlords that are sitting on vacancies are motivated to take advantage of this type of opportunity to get revenue coming through the door. To have a year-long commitment is a really great opportunity in the pop-up space. So they would feel, you know, comfortable putting their space forward, knowing that their basis would be covered for the forthcoming year, and they would potentially come out of that with a permanent tenant as well.
Okay. I mean, I'll echo what Mr. Lucente said. I'm intrigued by this idea. But to Mr. Pato's point, in the conversation we've been having with the town manager, you know, I would hate to see permitting and regulatory things where we do have to dot the I and cross the T get in the way, because this is such a compressed timeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sandine, you look like you went off mute.
I did. Thank you. So intriguing is the word of the evening, I guess. The questions that I have are, am I understanding this correctly, that if we're going to rotate through every 2 or 3 months, that we're going to have 3 pop-ups or 4 in this time period? Is that the idea?
So the idea is for the pop-ups to rotate seasonally, but in most cases, the space is shared. So depending on the pool of applicants, they may have multiple brands in the space at the same time. So you get a variety of uses and different collaborations in a single space. And what we've seen come of that is a mix of brands continuing to work together and or, you know, decoupling and then going into another pop-up or permanent space ongoing. So it ends up incubating a grouping of brands at the same time, and then they spread their wings and develop further in town.
So can you tell me a little bit about that? Because that's what I wonder about being in a storefront for a couple months. And at least for me, I'm kind of slow to notice new retail in town. Just me personally, but I wonder how much exposure people can get in 2 months, and what's the transition? Do we get 10% of these people moving on to, you know, fixed and mortar, brick and mortar their own later, or is it higher numbers than that?
It's actually substantially higher. You know, obviously each scenario is a little bit different, but through Project Pop-Up thus far, 53%. So more than half of the brands have gone on to take on permanent storefronts in the same location, like the same town. 2 to 3 months is typically the time period. 2 to 3 or 4 months is typically the time period that it takes for a brand to feel comfortable to make either a commitment to pop up for a longer period, 6 months, a year or more, or we consider anything beyond a year more of a permanent fixture. And so it's the ability to pop up, you know, at the right time of year for that brand, where they get to see a cross section of their customer and utilize all of the marketing tools. I mean, that's a big part of what a pop-up experience is, where you're treating retail as an event. There's a lot of marketing and PR and events and buzz building that goes into it, because they want to maximize the experience to get the exposure from it and then see where that can translate to a long-term business trajectory.
And are there costs for the pop-ups?
For the brands themselves, yes.
So can you elaborate a little bit about what would be expected of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have stipends slotted in here. Obviously, it comes down to what the particular space and market rate rent yields. But on a monthly basis, say a space is $3,000 or $4,000, we're able to offset those costs so it's more accessible for the brands that are popping up. But we find it's important to still have some accountability with those businesses to be paying, paying rent, paying utilities, paying something that gives them the level of commitment necessary to really see through the opportunity, and then also be transparent about what those costs are so they know how to budget for the long term in terms of what the market rate looks like, but have some further support going into it to be able to reduce the risk and test the waters. Does that make sense?
I probably have more questions, but in the interest of time, I won't ask them right now.
Thank you, Mr. Santi. Mr. Lucente.
Just a quick question on the commitment from the small business owner. Is there a requirement to have a certain number of hours that the business would operate as part of the application process? Do they have to, what we'd hate to do is have a pop-up, but they never open, kind of defeats the purpose. So just wondering what the agreement side is for them, taking this opportunity, very good opportunity that they would be presented. What's the flip side of the obligation beyond the rent that Mark was asking about?
That's a great question. Yeah, so typically, sometimes it's location specific if the landlord has required hours, but we typically request that their hours are in line at a minimum with neighboring businesses. So open, a minimum of 5 or 6 days per week, if not 7. A lot of the scenarios where they're sharing space allow more flexibility because they're sharing other resources, including staffing. And so, yes, we like to see them open. We've seen a lot of experiences where they'll do at least, one late evening per week, especially during the summer months. We really try to equip them with the tools to test a variety of hours and scenarios in partnerships with existing year-round businesses as well, whether that's a bounce back with a restaurant or other like-minded retailers.
Thank you, Mr. Pato.
And I may have missed it, but what is the process for evaluating the proposals and selecting the brands?
Sure. So it varies a little bit by municipality, but typically we run an application period, collect all of the information, including anything that is, of particular importance to a specific area, then go through and make recommendations, and so we can either run that process entirely, or if economic development or other parties would like to be, the final say in terms of who receives an offer, we certainly work hand in hand with each municipality, depending on their interests. And then it's a little bit of an ebb and flow where we have conversations with the brands. We talk through the commitment. We talk through the pairings and collaborations in the cases where they aren't doing a standalone storefront. And then work with them through the timeline and launch.
Thank you. Right, I'm inclined to that we would need to set up some sort of target policy for what we were looking for, given the location. And what comes to mind is there've been some places that have opened up recently that residents have expressed surprise that a particular kind of business was allowed there. And while it was by zoning, I think if we were funding it as an incubator, we would be much more subject to having vetted what kind of facility was being created.
Absolutely. We can definitely create a criteria for selection, prioritize certain uses, make sure it adds to the vibrancy and, coexist peacefully with neighbors.
Thank you. So, colleagues, this is just one of the items that is on our rather extensive list for this evening. And this is, the first time we're hearing this particular project, and it does seem to have an awful lot of pieces to it that to some extent are still open questions. So, one thing I think, we did the last time we had this conversation was figure out what were the things that we thought were ready to go right now. Or right then. And so I'd like to potentially suggest that we at least start with that framework for this evening. What are the things that are on this list for tonight that we think, we can agree to expeditiously? So I guess I would say, there's only one other thing on this list that I have a question about. And then I do want to add one thing, Mr. Malloy, you mentioned with the select board that I believe you said that I had requested this, what the SPRD consultant. I do want to mention, we were using we were benefiting from the planning staff on the SPRD committee, and the planning staff, as you all know, has been somewhat depleted of late, and that is what has given rise for, in order to keep the project going, the need to have external consultant to help work on the technical pieces of this. So I just wanted to give that by way of background, since this is new to the list for tonight. And then the question I guess I had, and it is really for Ms. Iyer, I think, on the storefront improvements. I thought that we had just received a grant that was going to be working on exactly that as part of the, sort of activation along the bikeway from Arlington through Lexington and Bedford, and that quite specifically included the activation of the backs of the businesses as they fronted the bike path. So is this overlap with that? Is this just an extension beyond what that would cover? I would just love a little more explanation if we could.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Chair. So the grant that we have received is the REDO grant, which is Regional Economic Development Organization grant through the Mass Office of Business Development, MOBD, which has gone to actually M3 Coalition. So it doesn't come directly to us, but as being part of M3 Coalition, we had applied through M3 Coalition to get a piece of it. We actually had applied for $300,000 for 3 different projects that are part of the recommendations that came through the Rapid Recovery Program, RRP, for East Lexington. The 3 projects were the store back storefront improvement, wayfinding, as well as mural program. There were 10 recommendations, as you may recall, and only 3 of them were put for the grant. And because the grant was cut to half, we've just received $150,000, and that would be distributed among 3 communities. So we'll be basically looking at only $50,000. And I don't think so, with a timeline of completing the project by June 30th, 2022, we'll be able to actually do any work with store back store improvement plan. And the other thing is that the guidelines has shifted a little bit. I don't know if we can actually provide the funding directly to the businesses as a grant. That was the recommendation that we had, like doing the technical assistance, helping them with the improvements, but also giving them some amount of grant support so that they can implement the store back and store front improvement plan. Whereas what wayfinding project would do is we can directly implement that as a town. So we are actually renegotiating or kind of, reworking our scope, narrowing down the scope, because we just have half of that funding at this point. So we are basically on square one just to see where we can actually utilize that $150,000 equitably between the 3 communities and get some project work done by June 30th, 2022. Does that answer? It was a long one.
So in essence, what this request for the 100,000 here is entirely supplemental to and to perform different work.
That's correct, and this would be specifically for Lexington businesses, not going to anywhere.
Okay, thank you. All right, colleagues, are there other projects just on this page about which you have questions or comments? Ms. Berry and then Mr. Sandine.
I just got some weird message about stopping screen sharing, so I don't know what that was about. So the AED request, did we apply for the state grant that was open in the month of January at all?
Mr. Malloy?
In the fire department, we did, but not in the police department.
Okay. And for the water bottle filling, that's there under DPW, I support that. I'm just curious why there's also a water bottle filling for recreation further down that is not in the list. So I don't know why that wasn't pulled out. And I'll just keep going. I have a few more. I absolutely 1000% support the outside shelters. And I think people will be looking for those as soon as the snow melts. We probably won't have them in place by then, but they're going to be looking for them come April or May. But I also wonder the DPW picnic tables. I see that being deferred to next year, and I wonder if that maybe should be moved up as well. I know that was one thing I saw a lot of last year was people, when the weather turned good, just being out everywhere, and we didn't seem to have enough tables in various places. Other than,
sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
I was going to say the picnic tables were put off just because we were doing the center project, and they'll be working in that area throughout next year, and so we just thought it made more sense to put it off for a year.
Well, I would think we could also use them in other places until they could be brought to the center.
Yeah.
So I would support moving that up. And that's all I have for right now, if somebody else wants to comment.
Okay, thank you. I think I said Mr. Sandin.
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about this participatory budget set aside and see if other board members had a similar thought on this as I did. When we first were discussing this participatory budget set aside, and we were talking about a number of $500,000, at that point, at least in my mind, I was thinking that a lot of this participatory budget set aside was going to be going to small business assistance. And since we've taken a chunk of that small business assistance and approved that already, I'm at least wondering if that $500,000 number is still the right number, or whether that is not needed to be as large as it is right now, because we put enough money into small business assistance. And I guess a follow-on question to that is, I know we saw like about a week ago some initial numbers on small business assistance. What are we seeing right now in terms of uptake on that and need in that area?
So, Mr. Malloy, you want to field that, or do you want?
Off the top of my head, I would say that we distributed about I think it was about $126,000. And I know that a number of the applications that we initially received were not completed. There was missing documents in them or missing information. And I know that I have to say I didn't have time to log on to Viewpoint Cloud today, but I received about 6 emails saying that I had information to look at there. And so I will need to take a look at that, but I'm assuming that some of these businesses have begun filing the additional paperwork they needed. So we'll begin ramping that up a little bit. Am I fading out again? So I will try to get closer. I moved it to the side of my screen, so it's not in the center. So maybe that's what the problem is. I just thought it would be the way this desk is set up. I just thought it'd be easier. So we're seeing that that there's I think in a few weeks we'll probably expend the full $250,000 that the board approved. But at the same time, I have no idea what suggestions residents will contribute as far as the participatory budgeting. It could be business related. It could be maybe residents think we should be paying premium pay to employees who have to work. Maybe it's for more benches or more tents or I'm looking at the list of things that are in Cambridge's, and they have a really broad list of what they had distributed. And so it's not ARPA money, but it was their participatory budget process they use. So things that we don't even think about. That's what the purpose is. They have people submit things, and if they comply with the ARPA spending and they're within, and this is my own thought, is that they should also, as much as possible, coincide with one of the select board's goals. And then we'll put it out for a vote. We'll have to have like our finance staff go through and confirm that they comply with ARPA spending requirements, and then we'll put it out first. The way I suggest, we'll take it to the board first, make sure you're comfortable with it. We'll put it out, and then there'll be a voting process. Then we'll take it back to the board, and we'll see what we get out of it. I really don't know what to expect. I think it'll be an interesting process to go through.
So,
and then we decide.
So at least my impression, my expectation was that at least half of this participatory budget would have gone to small businesses in town. So that's at least what I was thinking back when we set it aside a while ago. So I guess we, based on what Mr. Malloy is saying, we'll take another look at this once we don't necessarily are saying we have to allocate $500,000, because we'll be looking at what proposals come our way and deciding on a case-by-case basis. Is that what I'm understanding?
I think that's up to $500,000 that would be approved based on whether or not the proposals fit the guidelines. And just by way of comparison, I did do a little digging. Mr. Lucente had mentioned that our sister city in Antony had a very robust plan. I've been looking at a bunch of different plans over the last couple of weeks. And in Antony, actually, they have been doing this for 3 years. Again, it's obviously not ARPA, but including a percentage of their municipal budget. And they just upped it in the 3rd year by a 20% margin increase. And it comes out to, they list this on their site, roughly $11, the equivalent of $11 per capita. So I did this math at 500,000, we're at about $15 per capita roughly. So, I think we're in the range. I've also looked at, there's some other communities, from California to Massachusetts who are doing this. It has become quite common to take a piece of the budget to do this. And I think this is a really appropriate way with, one-time funds. We've talked about how this has the opportunity to really make transformative change, and we should hear what the community wants us to do. So we can see what that number feels like when we hear what the community wants.
So one other thing that we have heard that people have proposed that they would like is putting solar on affordable housing. So I was wondering if we might be able to look at putting this back on the list of consideration. I was kind of surprised to see it on a list removed from consideration, because I didn't think we made a decision not to do it. But I think it's a really good idea to help folks living in affordable housing ameliorate their electricity costs. And this is a great way to do it. So I would advocate for putting that back on the list for consideration.
So I think, Mr. Malloy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the sort of off the list of consideration wasn't like out of consideration, but it was off for like, we didn't have enough information or something right now to put it into the current list. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That's how I thought I understood you to have made. So that, Mr. Sandine, to your concern, it's not that we're not considering it at all. It's just not, to use the expression we use around this table, way too much. It's not fully baked.
Okay, so that's the headline is a little bit was leading me to a different conclusion. So
I had the same initial confusion, which is why I've clarified on that. So we're together there. Mr. Pato.
So I'm comfortable with what's proposed here. I do want to talk about the participatory budget process when we get to it. I'm comfortable with this amount. I note that in the report we got from the town manager on Friday, I think it said there were 17 applications for the small business and 120-some thousand has already been allocated. So I renew my concern expressed before that what we've allocated doesn't feel like it's going to be enough, and we should be prepared to add to that. And I'm not saying we should tonight, just because those other applications should be seen, but I remember seeing a reference that some of the applications were coming in asking for more than what our maximum amount was. And I think that given that kind of information, it would be useful to know if they're actually still worthy. I think one of the comments Mr. Sandin made was, if he doesn't want to give somebody $1 if what they really need is $2 to be able to stay in business. So I want us to be made aware of what this need is as soon as possible so that we can make sure that budget amount is adequate. Yeah. That said, I think what we have here is fine. I don't really want to go into more of small little things without having a clear definition of what problem is that thing solving that arose from the pandemic. I think our first round should be addressing the harms that the pandemic has created, not just that it satisfies the terms of the ARPA legislation. And then as we are further along, if we still have money, then we can do a lot of these worthy projects, because this whole list is worthy. It's a question of where's the real hurt? And let's make sure we're addressing it.
Thank you. So my comments, basically, I was comfortable largely with this list. With the exception of needing to still think a little bit more deeply about the pop-up presentation this evening. Again, I will echo the intrigued, but I'm not sure completely sold yet on the amount. But on everything else that was on this, sort of, let's call it above the line, I am in the yellow and the orange. I did echo Ms. Berry's comment about doing all of the, no-touch water bottle filler replacements. I do think that that is directly related to what's going on now. We want people outdoors. We want them able to refill their water. We want it to be no touch. Similarly, the picnic tables. And I had one other, the one other question that I had was about the signage, whether, and I was somewhat confused as to whether it was the one under the DPW or the one under the town manager, but I did, as part of the same presentation last week on communications and community engagement through the MMA workshop, very intrigued by some solar powered electronic signboards that are incredibly tasteful, that a couple of communities have used, where you can have some of the information that we are manually replacing in the board that's in front of Carrie, or trying to get out on the website or other places that I think could be at a relatively low cost means of communicating with residents where everybody drives by the center of town. So that was the one other thing. And again, it may not be ready for tonight, given that it's not fully determined, but I would love a little more thought on that. So with all of that said, I guess the question, I haven't heard anything negative about anything else that's on the screen that we're looking at right now. I think we do need to make a determination about the request on the pop-up piece. My personal view is that if we're going to keep doing this in chunks every so often, I might prefer to have a little more information, a little more specificity about where precisely and how we see it working. And I don't know if the rest of you, who feels which way on that one. So I would like to understand where people are. Mr. Lucente.
Ms. Haiti, your question, what are you, could you restate the question? I'm not sure I understood are you saying this process of us adding, items, and because it seems like the process we're going through is a slow train, yeah, which will require lots of meetings with lots of additional. You're talking about that process or a different process? No,
that's the process I'm talking about. And I'm saying, and my guess is that we will continue to talk about ARPA and finding, that there are specific needs that we want to address iteratively, as opposed to once a year for 3 years.
Right. Okay. yeah, I concur with that. My view on this list, I don't think I've spoke already on this list.
Oh, I'm
although
sorry.
No, that's okay. I just honestly couldn't remember if I already said it out loud or not. I'm okay with everything listed here. I think these are all important and where they are. Also, I would echo the $24,000 for the water filling and the recreation. I think may as well get them if we can get them all at the same time. But the one that sort of doesn't fit with me, the smallest one on the list too, the second smallest, is the SPRD consultant. And my question for that is, if we're not paying for a staff person right now, could we use the funding in that budget for the consulting? I see Mr. Malloy shaking his head no. Okay.
I don't think we could.
Okay, and this is not anywhere else in the budget. This seems like a project that's been going on a long time. We had a shortfall. It just seems a little different than the rest of the stuff on the list, because it's like a midstream project we all just want to get done. With that said, I'm not going to, put up a big fight over it. I'm not sure it's worth our time. We have to get it done, and I guess it's an okay way to do it, just not my preferred method. And I also did want to just thank Mr. Malloy for the memo. I thought it was very helpful to see it laid out like that. Appreciated seeing, the commentary on it. Helped process all of what's on this list that we're talking about tonight. So I would support it. And, I did hear a couple members talk about the incubator space as a, let's see, maybe not. So I would lean in favor of it myself, but Ms. Hay, I know you said you didn't hear anyone speak negatively about the incubators, but anything on the list, but I just want to get clarification of where everyone was, but I think I would be okay with it.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? I know there are a couple people who had their hands up, and I will take a couple quick comments on this before we vote. So if there's anybody else from the board, or I should go to comments, Mr. Pato and then Mr. Sandin.
Right. So on the incubator space, I said I was okay with everything, but I thought we were going to hold on that one. I am in the position of thinking this sounds like a good idea, but I'd like to see it fleshed out a bit more before committing the money. At this point, I'm likely to support allocating the money, but don't want to do it tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
And I also have additional questions on the pop-up incubator that I'd like to see fleshed out more.
Okay. And I think I am in that camp as well. All right. So I am going to take public comment. I see first, Aaron, I'm going to let you go first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you for letting me speak, all of you for letting me speak. I wanted to weigh in on the pop-up in a couple of capacities. I mean, certainly speaking for the Chamber of Commerce, I think it's a great idea. I also am a former retailer entrepreneur myself and had a brick and mortar business / e-commerce business for 4 years. So I wanted to speak to a couple of the questions that I've heard from the board in both of those capacities. Mr. Sandin had said that had asked whether 2 to 3 months is really enough time for a business to get traction. And the reason that I think rotating those brands through the space makes sense on that 2 to 3 month scale, because we're not talking about somebody who finds out there's a pop-up and then decides they're going to go into business, right? We're talking about businesses that are already operating on Etsy, or they're operating from their home and going to craft shows. These businesses already have some customers and some brand recognition coming into the space. What the incubator space lets them do is see whether they're ready to take the leap to that level of a permanent space. In my retailer days, I worked with a lot of vendors who were working off their kitchen table and wanted to go bigger, but weren't sure that they would have the capacity because it's a huge investment. So the 2 to 3 months gives them at least some data to go on. How would I fare in a brick and mortar space? That's just to answer that question. The question about why the center is the right place for the pop-up, I think it will have the maximum impact in the center. If we're not with a pop-up, we're not going to change people's shopping habits, right? I know that we certainly have other spaces that need activation around Lexington, but the pop-up is not going to suddenly renovate or reinvigorate a neighborhood, right? It's going to feed off of the foot traffic that's already there.
Thank you, Ms. Sandler Rath. I'm sorry.
Thank
Your
you.
2 minutes, but thank you very much. I appreciate both points. And Jerry Michelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as Chair of the Senate Committee, we have spoke about the topic of the incubator and pop-ups going back pre-pandemic and trying to activate spaces. And what I heard tonight was leaps and bounds ahead of where our conversations were back then. I was very impressed by this presentation by Up Next and this project pop-up. If they were able to facilitate this is what was missing before. And I see this as definitely a good investment of this money. The space in the center, say, for example, if it's the hair cuttery space, for example, as opposed to a Sanyo, which is very large and maybe needs more renovation to it. The possibilities are endless, but this is a proper way to spend this money in my view. And I think the timing of it is now. If we are looking at February and then into March, suddenly you're at the spring season. If you push it out to March and then you get to April and May, you've lost it and you don't have somebody established. So the timing, I would suggest that the board reconsider it and put it into this round right here and not hold off for another 2 weeks. And the last comment is ironing out some of the logistics and the zoning and the signage. We can find a way to say yes, as opposed to saying no to some of these ways of doing things. And I think the town has done that and showed it during the pandemic, and I think we can do it with this incubator too.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Michelson. Ms. Berry, did you have something you want to jump in here?
So following up on Mr. Michelson's comments and sitting here thinking about the presentation and other ARPA presentations and votes that we've taken, I'm curious if my colleagues would support us approving this amount this evening, contingent upon working out details, with Mr. Malloy and Ms. Iyer and the proponent, Ms. Yee, and they would report back to us. And in the meantime, anyone who has serious questions, we get those to Mr. Malloy and Ms. Iyer.
I tell you what, let me think about it and let me listen to, we have one more resident with their hand up and then we can go back around on this. Ms. McKenna.
Hi, Dawn McKenna speaking as chairman of the Tourism Committee. So the Tourism Committee and the Center Committee both met about the ARPA funds. And one thing we all agree on is that we need to address immediate needs, and holding on to $7.7 million of this for what if later is not what I had in mind or the Tourism Committee had in mind. So I urge you to spend as much money as you can, as quickly as you can. I want to thank you for supporting the website. It's long overdue from tourism, and I appreciate that. I also 150% support the pop-up now. I hope you'll approve Susie Berry's suggestion. And the fact of the matter is, if we had not been able to overcome this kind of pushback when we started the Liberty Ride, we wouldn't have the tourism dollars that we have to do today. This is an income generating opportunity for the town with great things behind it. But I do want to say, I'm fine with the fact that they're asking for $10,000 in marketing, but I need to point out to the select board that in 2009, through a special article at town meeting, the tourism committee got $25,000 in funding for marketing. $10,000 is in this project. That is the right order of magnitude for this project. $25,000 is way below what we should be doing with tourism. So I would hope that in our next look at numbers, that there will be a significant amount of money added for marketing, because if we marketed this town all around the way we used to be able to do, we would also drive business to the town. The other thing I want to say on a future thing quickly is we have a Liberty Ride vehicle that is 15 years old. It needs to be replaced. The last one that I'm going to add is that the board has supported and staff is supporting a cultural district. We need to have a chunk of money that can be used for programming as soon as that gets ready. So those are the three things I'd like to see you add, but please approve the pop-up and thank you for doing the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKenna. All right, so colleagues, pop-up. My questions were, we don't know. Well, let me put it differently. My concern is that we don't know where this would go. For starters, we don't have a relationship with a realtor, with a landlord. And if it takes some chunk of this very tight time frame to begin with, to negotiate that. Now, I understand those negotiations could be going on at the same time that we're also activating applications, but the whole year gets kind of pushed off. And then you end up with it's only, as Ms. Berry pointed out, it's only 9 months of actual activation out of the 12-month contract. And if the last 3 months end up being January, February, and March of next year, because we don't actually have the contract in place for a particular location until March of this year, I'm not sure we're doing anybody any good by having pop-ups in January. So that's sort of where I am about trying to figure out what's the right timing. And that was just the biggest of the pieces that I didn't quite understand. I also, to be frank, have a little bit of a question about the $100,000 going to not the local businesses that are trying to start up, but going to the facilitation of that. And it may be that that is the right way to do it, that, that the businesses couldn't do it on their own, even with, the extra dollar, as Mr. Sandin put it. But that was what I wanted a chance to sort of digest. So those were the reasons that I was hesitating, which is not to say they're insurmountable, but just so you understand where my thinking is. Mr. Pato.
So I agree with that. I would have viewed this very differently if we had a landlord come in as part of this proposal saying, here's the location, and you have a deal to start on moving forward. I would also have another view of it as saying, okay, we can tentatively fund it and to get that commitment, but not commit a year's funding and the whole project if it turns out we don't have a location, right? So I don't know if this is a chicken and egg problem, and how do you get it to the point where we have something that is reasonable? But I certainly don't want to say, oh, here's $100,000, and if there's never a place to put it, yeah, we've spent it. So that's sort of what I was hoping could be resolved before you come back to us on how are we moving going forward? Is this really actionable?
And for me, I alluded to this in my questions, but what we're seeing is the financial model for the town's money going out to this organization, but I'm not seeing the total financial model. And I'd like to see the total financial model for what is happening on rents, what's happening for the people who are being the pop-ups. To me, I really like to see how the overall thing works. I don't quite understand that yet.
Mr. Lucente.
So I guess I'm coming at it a little different. an angle, because I think what the bold move the board did last time we had an ARPA discussion is we said, okay, we're going to take $250,000 and use the people that we've hired to make sure that our interests are protected. And what it sounds like is we're our goals as a board and our goals as a community is we want an active center. We've all said that, we've all seen it. To have us at this table make that happen in a time frame that's reasonable seems a little unlikely. That we're, perfect is the enemy of good. And I don't want us to get trapped in the nitty gritty details of what we're seeing in front of us, whether it be the small business assistance or the pop-up concept. I think we're trying to put the money in the right buckets so that it gets used by the right people to get the results we're looking for as a town. We could analyze this really, we're really good at that at this board, analyzing things, and we may find ourselves, in June, finally saying, okay, let's do a pop-up. And I think I'm swayed by the idea of let's let the experts that we've hired make sure that our interests as a community are protected, and that the right people are getting this assistance to kick in something. And I know Mr. Sandine had mentioned earlier about, we want the small businesses to get help, right? This is a way to get small businesses help that are local. There's a lot of buckets of help here. And even the discussion we'll have hopefully in a few minutes on the potentially $500,000 toward participatory budgeting, that very well could all go to small businesses as well. I mean, we have no predetermined view of where it could go. So I may be in the minority on this, but I do support, I think, going forward with this and us being bold and trying it out. If it's the worst idea and it fails, we won't do it again, but it very well may be a success. And other communities have obviously that we liken ourselves to have obviously seen this as there's been some success stories there. So I'm willing to take the gamble. I think it's fairly safe bet for us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do see, Ms. Iyer has her hand up. I guess the only other thing I want to add is that in the materials that we saw, you're right, Mr. Lucente, other communities have seen this as a success, but I did notice that in whichever the first, I've forgotten now, I think it was Newton maybe, that it was funded through a grant. It was funded through, it was an MOBD regional pilot grant. It wasn't funded with municipal funds. So that's the other hesitation that I have is this something that, we could be funding through a different source as opposed to this, but Ms. Iyer, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chair. So first thing, I did reach out to MOBD about the grant option. They are not running the grant anymore. That's why we had applied for the redo grant and we did receive the redo funding. The second, I completely agree with Mr. Lucente on a couple of things. One is that we supported the small businesses through $250,000, but honestly, I'm sitting on applications that are worth $630,000. And I'm receiving calls every day about what happened to my application. How can I make sure that I get the funding so that I can stay in business? So those are the current businesses that are here and they may be vacant pretty soon. But I'm talking about recruiting businesses and helping vacancies, because that's not supporting the vacancies that are here. It's just supporting the businesses that are here. So just wanted to make sure that that point is addressed, and I hope that I address the grant. I am looking at different grants, but from all the grant resources that are available, I haven't found any that we could actually avail for this kind of a recruitment.
Thank you. And Ms. Iyer, do you know, if we go ahead and were to do this as a contingent basis, assuming that they could get the lease space, is there anything in the contract that you would have with, I think it's Up Next, that to my point about we end up with the tail of the contract being the months where Ms. E said, you know, ending in December is the right time because nobody wants to be starting a pop-up in January. Is there a guarantee of any sort that they will fill whatever the contract ends up being, the time that they will fill all of those available windows?
So here, that's why I was actually raising my hand, because there's another piece of information that's missing out of this. I've been also working with the procurement officer because this is $100,000, even though it's coming through ARPA and it is a grant, we are not giving it directly to small businesses that are located in Lexington. We might have to go through an RFP process for this. So if we do that, we'll be covering all those bases. What I'm hoping that the board would do is give us that $100,000 and we start that RFP process sooner rather than later. And we have had several conversations, but Project Pop-Up is one of the ones that have had a lot of experience, and that's what we are looking for, the success rate. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is during this ARPA small business grant funding, I noticed a lot of home-based businesses, online businesses that are local Lexington based, and we would definitely support those businesses popping up in Lexington itself. So definitely would make sure that that is a criteria when we actually choose businesses. But yes, we would have to go through an RFP process. That's my understanding for now.
So then really the request would be for us to authorize $100,000 towards a contract for a facilitation of pop-up businesses for a period of a year following the awarding of an RFP. So actually in the process of drafting the RFP, we probably get the questions answered and the location. So that does make me actually willing to move this forward. So I'm comfortable with that. Mr. Sandin or Mr. Pato?
So I agree. I was going to say the same thing, that responding to this as a contract for the town will pay a particular LLC a certain amount, that I'm not comfortable. Saying we're going to set aside money for you to do, figure out how you're going to execute on this, that I can do.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Sandin?
And I would agree, but I still would say I'd love to see the overall financial picture, not just one half.
Okay. So
thank you.
Mr. Sandin, I am not, well, whatever. Mr. Pato, go ahead.
So I just want to say one of the things that Ms. Iyer said really raised a red flag for me. She said she's sitting on $600 and some thousand worth of applications for the small businesses. If that's really the case, I think we have underfunded that significantly.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I do.
We go on. Can I just comment on that?
Please.
$630,000 worth of applications, but some of them, we went through the first round. One of the things we found is that some of the local businesses received substantial.
Mr. Malloy, you got to talk towards the camera. And when you turned to your left, we heard you perfectly. When you look straight ahead, we don't. Nope, sorry, my left.
I think what Mr. Malloy is saying is some of these businesses have received significant amount of PPP loans and other substantial funding from the state and federal funding.
And some are required to repay those and some are not. And so when we went through our rating, we looked at some of those. If a business received $400,000 or $500,000 in PPP loans and we're not required to repay them, that was one bucket. And then we had other buckets where somebody may have gotten $125,000 in PPP loans and were required to repay them. And those were the businesses that they provided us financial records, and we were able to see that they were struggling more than others. And again, some were asking for more than what we had as a cap on the program, and we didn't really see that it was justified. So I would say, as we continue to go forward, I would strongly recommend that the board be prepared for us to come forward at some point in time when we get close to expending the $250,000, for us to request additional funding, but we're not quite there yet. In a couple of weeks, we might be. And so that's something that Sandia and I have discussed, and it's something that we would probably be the next thing that we would bring forward, because I think we've got enough other projects now that we have to stay within our bandwidth, and we can get those going. But I think this program has taken off, and like I said, I've gotten a number of pop-up emails in my, I don't want to use pop-ups because we're talking about pop-ups, but emails today from Viewpoint Cloud for additional packages to start reviewing. And I just was in meetings all day, didn't have a chance to review them at all. I have an opportunity tomorrow and Thursday to do that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so colleagues, are we willing to move to approve the list as presented here and on the screen of the recommended next set of expenditures, which come to $218,200, bringing us to a total so far, I think, distribution of, I forget where we are now. What does that bring us to?
Well, the total would be, if these were all approved, it would be another $1,018,200.
Thank you.
We would then be at a total of $2,233,200.
Thank you. This print is way too small for me, at least at this hour of the night. So Ms. Berry.
I so move.
Thank you very much. Is second?
No, Ms. Hay, before we second, we also talked about the bottle. Three of us at least expressed concern that the bottle fillers for the recreation were not on this list. And we'd like to see it added to this list, so I don't want to forget that.
Thank you. And two of us talked about the picnic tables.
Thank you, Mr. Vicente, but it's late and I need to use a different room, so trying to wrap this up.
Okay, so how do we feel about the additional, I'm looking very hard to find it on my sheet. I know I have it circled somewhere. Here it is. It was an additional 24,000 for the recreation, no touch bottle fillers. And there was also conversation about the 24,000 on the picnic tables. I see a thumbs up from Ms. Berry, Mr. Pato, Mr. Lucente, and Mr. Sandin. Okay, so it is the list as presented here, plus an additional $48,000 covering the two requests, one from recreation for bottle fillers and one from DPW for picnic tables. And we will leave it to the excellent judgment of our professionals in the DPW as to where they can deploy those picnic tables while the streetscape project is ongoing. Ms. Berry has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Just wanted to be clear that the motion was that the pop-up was to go forward with an RFP, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Which is apparently what it has to do by law anyway, whether we say it or not, Mr. Sandy. But yes, moved and seconded by a roll call vote. Mr. Lucente.
Yes.
Mr. Pato.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Berry.
Yes.
And Mr. Sandin.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes by a vote of 5-0. We have one thing left to decide, which is the process on participatory budgeting. But Ms. Berry, I hear your question. Do we need to take a 2-minute break or can we push through this?
Clarify what you want us to do now.
We have just approved the inclusion of $500,000 for participatory budgeting. We were going to talk about the proposal that Mr. Malloy included in his memo. I believe it's page 8, which has the outline of a draft plan for participatory budgeting, which essentially requires that we solicit suggestions from residents that fit with our goals, that fit with the rules of ARPA, that are fully described as far as impact, number of cost, and any official background or any explanatory background They get vetted for those proprieties. They come to us for final decision on whether or not to include. And then we would have to go out to some sort of a methodology of having votes. And there are a bunch of different possibilities for how that is done. I have a meeting scheduled for Thursday morning with the town of Amherst, who did a very successful run of this. They used a platform called Bang the Table as the underlying software. I have a quote on what that software costs. There is actually a potential in here, I believe Mr. Malloy had included, that we provide up to $20,000 or $25,000 for whatever underlying software will be needed to execute this. But I think at least the rough concept of what has been proposed here, so that we can start moving to use the money that we just agreed we want to do. So that's my question. How do we feel about this as a rough proposal? Mr. Pato?
So I favor this rough proposal. I do want us to come back and talk about how we're guaranteeing accessibility and participation in the voting portion, but getting it to the RFP process, or the go out and start submitting requests, I'm ready to do that.
Thank you. And those accessibility questions are definitely on my list. Brianna said they did use, a embedded translation function in the software, so that it didn't take a third party. It didn't take a Google. It was a better means. So at least on that level, but we have other accessibility issues. Anybody else comments on this? Ms. Berry?
Just some clarity on how it's going to be marketed to the community.
Excuse me, Mr. Malloy. Thoughts?
We would probably try to set something out. I would talk to Sean Duggan about it, but we would probably put it right on our homepage. We would probably put it on Facebook, Twitter, and everything else that he uses, but we could also do something with Code Red. Cambridge actually puts a banner across the street, across Mass Ave, right where, somewhere near City Hall, that they say, participate in the budget process, and has, contribute your ideas, and has the website in which you go to in order to do that. I don't know what that would cost, but we would do all of those kind of things to try to, and Code Red goes to, I think, 25,000 phone numbers in town now. And so that's a way that we have been using to reach out to the broadest number of people so that everybody gets it.
So and similarly, I think that we have, so if you look at our sister city, Antony, they have a full page on this. The Amherst program is called Engage Amherst, and you can look on their webpage as well. I think when we come back around on this, we can, talk about what specifics we want to incorporate. Ms. Berry?
So I do not support using Code Red, because we haven't used Code Red for other things that aren't kind of emergency related. And that's a conversation that we've had off and on the board, and have just kind of left it to emergency related things. If we're going to make a change there, that should be a conversation. And the second part, when you said participate in the budget on a banner, I think that would be very confusing to the community, because this is kind of like, my understanding is this is a one-time deal. You're not yet asking us to put this into the regular fiscal year budget.
Yeah.
So I think it's the words we choose. And if Ms. Hay just said, engage, what was it, Amherst?
Yeah.
We might want to think of something catchier like that, because to what's listed here, this is not something that's then going to convert into being an actual part of the budget. Correct?
I agree with everything you've just said.
Yeah.
I was basically thinking off the top of my head, because we haven't talked about how it was going to be marketed. I would talk to Sean.
Yeah.
And we would use constant contact. We would use whatever we typically use to reach out to as many people as possible.
But to Mr. Pato's point about accessibility and people being able to vote under whatever platform we determine they're going to vote under, we also need to make sure that, as many people as we can are aware of it. And maybe that's a postcard like we did for the Vision for Lexington survey or something like that.
Yeah. And Sean is sitting right next to me during the day, all day long now, so I will talk to him tomorrow about it.
I will also say that the person who runs Engage Amherst is Sean's counterpart. So he may end up getting drafted into this as well. But I think it says a lot that that is run by the information officer, to your point, Ms. Berry. Mr. Sandin.
Mr. Lucente had his hand up before me.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Mr. Lucente.
Hey, so just on the process here, I support this and I think we should move forward with what's proposed here. We're just trying to understand sounds like there's multiple softwares or multiple avenues that we're going to go. Who's taking the lead in selecting that software? Is that, it sounded like Ms. Hay, are you?
I'm just doing a little
research?
research so
Oh,
that
okay.
I can help share information with the board. I think this is probably staff owned.
So one of the things
Curious
that,
what our next, sorry, I was just curious what our next step at the board is going to be like. What should we anticipate as board members to see in the next month, 2 months, 4 months? Or will this just sort of set itself?
it'll be out there in the public, and then you'll get a report that'll, once we get, I'll give people the time that I laid out here to submit things. Once we get that, we will go through it and make sure that it complies with the ARPA funding requirements and how it may or may not be consistent with the select board's goals. And then we'll give you that initial list before we even put it out to be voted on, because I think the board should have a stab at it and say, well, this complies with ARPA and it's consistent with our goals in a weird way, or maybe it's not consistent with our goals and we don't want it even being included on what people will vote on. And so I want the board to have an opportunity to voice where they're at, so that when we put something out to the community to vote on, that it's a list that the board has already taken a look at and is comfortable with all of those items. And so then I think I put and I'm looking at, unfortunately, I'm looking at what Kim has. There's a timeline. Thank you. When we would get it back to the board, these may be a little bit aggressive. We may want to give it additional time, but yeah.
So I guess my only sort of question is, there's 2 bites at the apple for the public. One is I want to participate by giving an idea. And then the next is I want to participate by saying I'm going to rank the ideas this way.
Correct.
So the software, Ms. Hay, you're talking about is for the ranking piece, not the, I want to give an idea. Okay, that helps me understand. So the idea generation will only be from our public information officer, not from an external software.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the software cost comes out of the ARPA money?
Well, I was just about to say, we actually skipped over that, and I apologize. I had it in my notes, but in the wrong part of my notes. In Mr. Malloy's memo under the participatory budgeting paragraph, he did mention that we should probably allocate another $20,000 or up to $20,000 to be used towards whatever software or other means we might need to use over the course of time. And the 9,000 that I quoted for banging the table was on an annual basis. There was something else Mr. Malloy mentioned that was about 7,000, but since ARPA lasts for 3 years, I think that the 20,000 seems like the right number to say, if we find the right product, we should have the authority to go ahead and get it started, because they can help us mobilize and may have additional elements of the product that help us get the word out, as well as rank the voting.
And really what I put, it was $20,000 for community engagement. So if Sean said, yeah, we should send out a postcard, then that would be included in community engagement and would provide that funding for that.
Yeah. So I think, if the board is comfortable, I am going to make another motion, one more motion for $20,000 of the ARPA money to be spent on community engagement tools.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Hold on. So the participatory budgeting, the 500,000 is a one-time for 2022, or are we doing this each of the 3 years?
So
the original proposal was 500 a year.
But we'll take 2023 and 2024 up as we get to those.
Okay. I was just curious in relationship to the cost for the software.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have moved, and someone has seconded, if we are comfortable with it, $20,000 for community engagement. Seeing no further comment or objection, I will take a roll call vote. Mr. Lucente.
Yes.
Mr. Pato,
Yes.
Ms. Berry,
Yes.
Mr. Sandin,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Motion passes 5-0. Can we also take a motion, can we also have a motion to approve the rough outline of this format for participatory engagement, understanding that there may be some tweaks along the way, as well as some refinements as we figure out what exactly our means of engagement will be. Can we support this as the outline of our process?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded by a roll call vote. Mr. Lucente,
Yes.
Mr. Pato,
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Berry,
Yes.
Mr. Sandin.
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0. That is all of our business for this evening, unless anybody has something that was unforeseen that we need to address this evening. Seeing none, I will announce before we adjourn that our next scheduled meeting is Monday, February 7th at 7, also on Zoom. I move that we adjourn. Is there a second? Oh,
Second.
Mr. Malloy, I'm sorry. Did you have something?
I just want to ask a question if my sound is better now.
It
My
is.
microphone. Thank you.
Much.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. Earlier today, I was using AirPods and the mic was set up for the AirPods and it defaulted back to my laptop, not to the camera. So that's why it was so bad.
All
and
right.
only
Well,
worked
thank you
when
for
I
the
was looking
technical
at my
assistance.
laptop.
Good to know. All right. Motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded by a roll call vote. Mr. Lucente,
Yes.
Mr. Pato,
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Berry,
Yes.
and Mr. Sandin.
Yes.
Thank you all and have a lovely week.